We've done it. Here we are. We've done it. We're streaming. I just had a 2 week vacation where I was back in Manitoba to say hello to family. And I got back late last night, slept in like crazy. Slept in like crazy. Basically woke up and set up this stream and hit the stream button. So I feel like I'm going to be a little bit behind the eight ball and a little bit behind the times on this stream because I think that I haven't really been able to immerse myself and entrench myself in what's going on in terms of the news. I haven't really been able to focus too heavily, but near as I can tell, it looks as though the news is essentially unchanged, right? It's essentially unchanged. That uh, uh, it's the United States government committing a genocide in Gaza. It's climate change is going to destroy us all, right? It's hey, look at how ridiculous our politicians are. Uh, I'm glad I'm back too, Dragon Fruit. Good to see you. Good to see you. This I feel like this stream is gonna maybe be a little bit loosey goosey, but whatever. You know, man. Whatever. I'm still in vacation time. I'm still in vacation mode, so I'm definitely like kind of feeling like I'm just bumping along, right? Just bumping along. Literally, literally got nothing left on my plate for the rest of the time. Although my capitalist work did ask if I can come back early, so I'm like, I don't want to. I don't want to. You know, I probably will because it is what it is, but I don't want to. I'm rather enjoying this time I have to myself. I enjoyed seeing my family. I enjoyed going out to Manitoba and just talking to like regular people while they're living their life about what they're experiencing and what they're going on. And honestly, like, there's a real like, oh well attitude. There's a real just like, oh well kind of attitude going on. Like, I know people who are in the political system in Manitoba and who are involved in the political system. Eggsy, good to see you. And they really just have a kind of like, oh, okay, we're just going to bump along, right? There's a real just kind of like bump along attitude. Nobody has like an agenda or an idea. Nobody has a thought about how to actually deal with any of these problems. Everything is just kind of like, oh, well, that's what's happened and that's what's going on and that's what it is. And we're just going to bump along. And I'm like sitting here being like, we should nationalize the housing market. Like we should nationalize the food distribution chain. We should nationalize these things, right? We should begin nationalizing this stuff and talking about nationalization in a serious way, because the project of private housing has failed. I actually have an article that I kind of want to read. Yeah, I just saw this, and the title is so evocative and so great. This is from The Conversation. The private sector housing experiment has failed. Ottawa must now step up on social housing. Like, anyone who wants to stand in front of me and make the argument that the private sector housing experiment, that the idea that we should allow the housing market to be a market in the first place, and anybody who wants to make the argument that that has been successful, I think is either a completely detached person or probably a psycho, right? Like, we are looking at a situation where these housing prices are so illegitimate. There's no way that any of this is sustainable. There's no way that any of this is that you're supposed to be able to sell a house for $3 million. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's such trash brain thinking. The idea that housing should be at this price point. And there's lots of really interesting articles and interesting things coming out saying, hey, have you noticed how we have like this enormous money laundering and fraud problem? Have you noticed that criminals, right, are taking advantage of our open housing system, right? We have an open housing system where there's like almost no regulations whatsoever. The regulations that do exist are easy to sidestep and easy to work around, and nobody seems to care about them at all. And what's happening? People are taking illicit money, illicit finance, illicit capital that they earn that's connected to malfeasant, illegal activity. Cotton, good to see you, my man. Good to see you, Cotton. I know you forgot your headphones, right? How dare you, sir? I take it personally. I don't take it personally. Good to see you, bud. People are taking their illicit capital and they're funneling it through our housing market. And our housing market is so deregulated and so shitty and so incapable of checking for this kind of stuff that they're able to buy up more and more housing, right? And then here's my favorite part. Methane, good to see you. So they'll buy a house, right? So a money launderer will buy a house in order to launder their money, and then they'll put a renter, quote unquote, a renter into that house in order to have a steady stream of money laundering, right? So the initial payment is money laundering. LED, good to see you. Mikhail, good to see you. So the initial payment is money laundering. And then the renter is money laundering, where they have this money laundering scheme built in to our system. And even better than that, it's completely to their benefit. It's completely to their benefit to make sure that prices get inflated. Because if general prices are inflated, then they can launder more money, launder faster. Right? So they want to increase the scope and scale of this money laundering scheme, and they're turning our housing market into a money laundering scheme. And what's our Dave, good to see you. And what's our response to this? Well, we'll raise interest rates a little bit, and we'll raise property taxes a little bit, yeah, right? And so what you're doing is you're turning to regular, normal people who would like to live in regular, normal housing and live in a sane, rational society that understands that housing exists for the purpose of housing people, and you're telling them, oh, you are going to have to pay more for your housing. You're going to have to pay more interest. You're going to have to pay more taxes. You're going to have to pay more for the house itself. You're just going to have to pay more for all this kind of stuff. While the people who are doing the money laundering, well, they're not going to stop doing the money laundering, right? That all the government is doing is saying, okay, well, now we're just going to increase the price of doing business for money launderers. We're going to say to the money launderers, hey, money launderers, it's going to cost you, instead of being able to spend 1 penny to launder $1, it'll now cost you 10 pennies to launder $1. And the money launderers, well, that's just the price of doing business. That's just the price of doing business in Canada. Okay. Well, okay. We still get to launder our money though, right? We still get to like funnel our money through the Canadian market, right? And so instead of having, at the end of it, instead of having $10 billion, I end up with $8 billion. Okay, I'm going to continue money laundering through the Canadian system because there's no actual check that's actually being put in. It's all this disincentivization. This will disincentivize certain behaviors in the market. What it'll do is it'll make people less incentivized to do. Well, you know what a heavy incentive for these money launderers are? Jail. Right? Because that's what they're actually looking at on their end. They're sitting there going, I've got all this money that is connected to a bunch of illicit, illegal things. I'll give you a very clear example of an illicit, illegal activity that a billionaire might be interested in laundering their money away from. So in China, China has just gone through like a big construction boom, right? Massive, enormous construction boom where they've built a whole bunch of buildings very quickly. And the Communist Party of China has permitted a certain amount of capital investment into that system and has permitted private equity and private institutions into that system. Well, when you allow psychopaths into your system, right, those psychopaths try to find a way to game the system in order to benefit themselves. And so some of this construction has gone up and been slapped up without rebar, using shitty construction material in the first place, not following any sane, rational position. And it takes a minute for people to realize that this is what you've done if nobody's paying attention, right? There's 1.5 billion people. The National People's Congress is something like 3,000 people, right? Like, it makes sense that there's going to be fraud and malfeasance. It's why China will turn around and come down so hard on groups when they find out this kind of malfeasance has occurred. And so what happens? Well, 5-10 years goes down the line. All of the private equity capitalists have fled the country and have left, right? Because they know what's about to happen. Their buildings fall over, right? Crushing and killing people, which they knew was going to happen. How did they know? Because they built the building without rebar. Because they slapped up a building knowing that, well, this will save me $100 million and I can pocket that $100 million and walk away from this project. Sure, it kills a bunch of people. I don't care. I'm a psychopath, right? Because I'm a capitalist, right? And so when this happens, right? Well, you know what the Chinese government does to these guys? Do you know what happens if you are caught by the Chinese government? If you're still living in China and they find out that your money was connected to one of these projects, well, they take your money, they seize your assets, and they execute you. That's what happens in China. So, you got people who have done this fraud where they've slapped up these shitty buildings in China and they've killed people over it, right? Because they're psychopaths. And they've seen what the Chinese government is going to do to them, right? They've seen, oh, I did exactly that same scheme, that same scam right over there. I did that. And they took everything from that guy and executed him. Oh, okay. Well, I gotta launder this money as fast as possible. I gotta get my fingerprints off of all of this. I gotta make sure that when the Chinese government goes to investigate this, they don't find my name. They find a shell company, and then another 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 shell company, and then that shell company just kind of vanishes off into nothing, and there's nobody who's tied to any of it whatsoever. And the bottom of that chain of shell companies is a money laundering scheme in Canada, where all of that money and all of that just gets funneled through the Canadian real estate market. They tried to do it in China. Right? They tried to do the same thing in China, and housing prices started to go up. And the Chinese government was like, no, that's not going to happen. Xi Jinping even stood up and said, housing is for living in, right? It's not for speculation or investment, right? Or money laundering. And housing came down, right? Because they started to actually do something about it. And now... what we're faced up with here in Canada is we're faced up with this money laundering scheme, this money laundering scheme that says to Canadians, yeah, you're just gonna have to put up with paying $3 million for a townhouse in Toronto, because criminals who murder people in China want to launder their money through our system. This is a thing that makes sense. Canada. So we're a fake country with no principles at all. Like, no principles whatsoever. Our principles are what's going to work for the billionaire class. What's going to work for the psychopaths? How do we make sure that the psychopaths are safe? How do we make sure that psychopaths get to run away from the government that they betrayed and killed a bunch of people in order to harvest as much wealth from? How do we make sure those people are safe? And you know what we'll do? We'll do a little bit of performative action so that we can actually slice a little piece off of this scheme, right? So instead of arresting these people or saying, like, no, you can't launder money through our system, or instead of having some kind of nationalized system to ask basic questions like, are people going to actually be living in these properties? Is this actually like a thing? Like, or is this a money laundering scheme? Instead of that, we're just going to be like dopily going along with this thing. And the most embarrassing part about it, near as I can tell, the most embarrassing part about this, Resist, good to see you, bud. Good to see you. Resist over on Twitch. The most embarrassing part about all of this is that CSIS is writing up articles being like, the Chinese government is involving itself in our democracy because they're having their embassies cart little old women over to voting booths in vans. Yeah, the embassy bought a house in a Chinese territory so that Chinese citizens and Chinese Canadians can just come to that house instead of coming all the way downtown to an embassy. That's a police station and it's a threat to Canadian sovereignty. They're writing up articles like this and like releasing statements like this. Meanwhile, there's an enormous, massive money laundering scheme happening right under their noses, and CSIS is just like, that's just the free market of capital working for the benefit of the citizens. A rising tide raises all boats, you know. Rising tide raises all boats. That's what's happening. Like, that's how pathetic we are. Like, it's pathetic now. Like that our quote unquote intelligence community is more interested in like the threat of little old ladies getting driven to voting booths than the threat of billionaires, criminal billionaires, laundering their money through our housing market. Like that's how pathetic we are. I don't know that I've ever seen secrets. Wow. And the spelling of secrets is like S.E.C.R.E.T.S. which is itself a deep secret. What does that mean? It's a mystery. Well, I'm glad to be back. Well, one of the things I really started noticing while I was out is that it really verified something that I've been saying all along, which is that if I don't do this stream, I end up talking this way to regular people out in the world, and they don't like it. Oh, Azron, good to see you, Azron. Oh yeah, of course, it's not just the Chinese, but BlackRock and others are in on the game as well, of course. No, of course. Like, it's going to be a widespread situation. It's going to be a widespread thing where it's all just going to be like... where the whole thing is just going to come down all around everybody's ears, right? Because, like, where are you going to put these people? Where are these people going to live? Where are these people going to go? While you're doing your money laundering Ponzi scheme, right? While you're looking at your investment properties, while you're looking at turning the housing market into a series of investments, right? Well, where's everybody going to live? Where's going to live? Resist wants to talk about Vosh for some reason. Yo, John, did you hear the shocking story about the pedo streamer Vosh who said he looked at underage images? Shocker. He actually has images of underage girls on his computer. He showed them on stream? Is this recent? Or is that like something way back in the day? Because like way back in the day, he was much more open about this kind of stuff. Right? It was recent? Like, has he been banned? Like, he recently is showing pictures of underage girls on his computer and showed them on stream. Oh, he accidentally flashed them on screen. Oh, God. Accidentally showing, I don't know, pedo porn on screen. Oh, hentai lollies, yeah. Like... his explanation of it is unreal. 3 or 4 days ago. What was in the folder that Twitch streamer accidentally... Well, now I'm a bit skeptical, because if I click on this, am I going to be showing off stuff? Look up the goblin bit. Look, I'm going to be real clear about something here, okay? I am not anti-pornography. I am not one of these people who's like gonna look at anybody and be like, oh, he's looking at naked pictures. Like, come on. Let's be grown-up adults about this, right? Like but Vosh does kind of have a history of like pedophilia accusations. There's a clip that circulates online where he is openly defending child pornography. He's of course changed that position a little bit as time has gone on, as he's gained in popularity and he's come to understand. I love that they're calling him socialist. I would not describe Vosh as a socialist. I mean, he's basically a liberal, right? Like, he doesn't really know anything about socialism. Landed himself in some hot water after accidentally showing his viewers a questionable folder during a live stream. Contained adult content that some are purporting delves into controversial territory. Well, I mean, I would argue that pornography itself delves into controversial territory. A big issue, okay? A big issue with the whole, a big issue with the whole subject of pornography is that we're a highly repressed society where everyone is engaging in one way or another in pornography, but everybody is sort of pretending like they're not, right? And so when something comes out and when something happens, right, it's already a scandal. Like, literally, like, man looks at picture of naked woman, and it's already a scandal. So then you get down into the deeper, like, the 4chan levels of all of this, right? And the 4chan levels of all of this is like the basement of human existence. It's like the basement of human thought, if you want to call it thought. And so if you've got a guy like Vosh, who very clearly exists in that sort of thing, like, you're going to be able to find all kinds of things. I love this. Vosh when he sees a horse. Yeah, little bit of this going on. What was in the folder? Vosh showed on stream. Yeah, as socialist as Biden is. Yeah. Matthias, good to see you. I'll talk about that in a minute, okay? I have not seen the interview yet. I just haven't had the mental capacity and the time to do so. I think that's probably going to happen tonight, actually. I'm going to sit down and actually listen to it. But I do have... So I can only react to the reactions, right? I've seen the reactions of people to it, so I can only react to the reactions of it. I don't actually have a fully engaged opinion. But I think the reactions to it are interesting enough. But let's keep talking about Vosh and porn. Welcome back, John. You've been gone for 2 weeks. Let's buckle down and talk about the serious things that have been going on in the world for the last 2 weeks, guys. Vosh and porn. Perfect. Well, it's hard to tell. Yup. What appears to be adult imagery, along with subfolders containing further adult content. And also his tax information? What? Vosh, don't keep your tax information in your pornography file. Come on, dude. All the images shown appear to be drawn and depict or somewhat alleging is underage anime characters and characters inappropriately engaging with horses. Vosh does have a thing, man. He does. He's got a thing for the horse thing. He does. Like, he just does. There's that clip of all of this times where he's, like, defended it. Okay. But, like, I don't know, guys. Like, for all the things that Vosh is... Like, if you want to actually talk to me about Vosh, like, if you want me to actually have a real take on Vosh, like, this to me is, like... Okay, so a young man has, like, weird, eclectic pornography tastes that are strange. Okay, like, I kind of, maybe, like, he's a creep. Okay, we all know that about Vosh. Vosh, FBI informant. Like, if you really want to go after Vosh, like, if you really want to talk about why Vosh is dangerous, right? It's not because he looks at like anime porn, right? It's not because he looks at anime porn. It's because he has admitted on his stream to being an FBI informant, Da, 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 da. Oh, come on. This is something I actually have to save because I have found it before. Vosh admits to being an FBI informant on stream. Yeah, this is good. Here, I can even show the video. Let me know if the audio sucks for this. Hold on, I can just mute my mic. And it'll take a minute to load up. Bibbity bobbity. Yeah, it's a bit beyond weird if it's underage bestiality, yeah.
Like a Fed op. Like you could say that about literally anything. You know, there are informants everywhere. I'm an informant. Why do you think I did Antifa work back in Santa Monica? You know, yeah, I was ratting out names. Absolutely, we've all been informants. You know, yeah, like a Fed op. Like you could say that about literally anything. You know, there are informants everywhere. I'm an informant. Why do you think I did Antifa work back in Santa Monica? You know, yeah, I was ratting out names. Absolutely, we've all been informants. You know.
Yeah, we've all been informants. Everybody's been an FBI informant, right? Of course. Every single person who has ever existed has definitely been an FBI informant. Oh yeah, and it's just a joke. Oh, he was just joking. He was just joking, right? Like, if you want to have a real conversation about Vosh, it's not because of his weird, creepy, like, pornography tastes, right? Like, it's because he's an FBI informant posing as a socialist, posing as somebody who actually represents the left, when he's very clearly controlled dissent from the left, put there by the FBI in order to pretend to be a socialist, to give socialists and socialism a bad name. And also, you'll notice that Vosh has a very anti-tanky position, right? Vosh has an anti what he calls an anti-tanky position. So he's just as anti-communist as fascists are, right? Like, in that way, he completely agrees with fascists on the far right that communism is bad. It killed 100 billion people of a Vula iPhone, right? And he's just as educated about it, and he's just as informed in it, because that's his job. That's his job. His job is to be controlled dissent on behalf of organizations like the FBI and the CIA. He's only admitted to the FBI in order to funnel people away from communism, away from revolutionary action, away from learning about the labor unions, away from learning about the labor movement, and into the dead end of the Democratic Party. That's what Vosh exists to do, right? And it turns out that the only type of person that's willing to do that on behalf of the FBI is also a guy who's like a creepy loser looking at pedophilia porn, right? Like, yeah, Vosh is here to save you from tankies in the age of consent. Exactly. Like, again, because it's involving the issue of pornography, and I do think that, like, pornography, like, we live in a society that is awash with violence. Like, I can show a video on my stream of somebody being disemboweled, right? And that's just fine, right? Like, I can show a video on my stream of, like, Mortal Kombat where, like, people, like, get burned to death from the inside out with acid and lava, and, like, insects eat them from the inside out, and all kinds of creepy, crazy, insane bullshit, right? There's a lot of creepy, crazy, insane bullshit that exists in the mainstream in our society in regards to violence. And we all just accept that. It's just completely normal as far as anybody's concerned. It's a completely normal position for us to watch incredible acts of enormous violence. But if you begin to introduce that same kind of mindset into sex, we don't know how to deal with it because we're not very grown up. We're not really adults, right, when it comes to these kinds of conversations and these kinds of things. And if you think about the experimental ethos that we have in regards to violence, and then you connect that same kind of experimental ethos in regards to pornography, and you absolutely can see that there are just, like, there's a parody there. There's obviously, like, going to be kind of a creepy connection that occurs there. And then there's the infusion of that violent ethos into sexuality as well, right? And and so I get a little bit like, what's the right language to use here? Like, when you live in a society that is awash with this kind of stuff, and you live in a society that is like I think that people can get attracted to this kind of stuff on curiosity alone, right? On curiosity alone. Where Vosh steps over the line, right? Where Vosh steps over the line, and where he has stepped over the line in the past, is that he defends it, right? That this isn't human curiosity being like, whoa, what's going on? There's billions of bits of data out on the internet, and you're just like, oh, wash in a sea of it, and you encounter some of it, and you're like, oh, wow, that's so hot, oh my god, okay, well, now you know something about yourself. Now you know something about yourself that you didn't hitherto know, right? And maybe you should deal with that, right? Maybe you should look at that and go, oh, that's a thing. That's a situation that definitely exists in my consciousness. That's a problem, right? Oh, when I look at pictures of underage girls, I get hot for it. That's a problem, Vosh. Like, that's a problem, right? And then to turn around and then publicly defend that act? Bro. No. Like, no. Full stop. Right? And it's the same thing with, like, the horse porn thing. Like, bro, full stop. This is a problem for you. Right? This is something that you encountered, and you're like, oh, wow, so hot. Okay. Now you know. But you probably shouldn't be telling people about it. What a weirdo this guy is. What a creepy weirdo. Like, what a total fucking loser. And the fact that he's as popular as he is should tell you that there is a force underneath him that's supporting him, right? There's a force underneath him that's supporting him, and like, it's inverted mystic on Twitch is behind. Vosh accidentally shows pedo porn on screen. So we're talking about the relationship between Vosh, him being an FBI informant, which he admitted on his stream, and the relationship to pornography and pornography in the society. Pornography in the society is an interesting conversation, and it's sort of a shame that the lens by which we have to have this conversation is through Vosh. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Good to see you too, Inverted, by the way. I miss doing the stream too, believe me. And the yeah, I don't know what else I have to say about Vosh. Like and oh yeah, because of his desire to be outspoken about his love of underage girls and horse porn. Seems to be horses specifically, right? Because of that, even non-political streamers. So every so often, I saw a clip. There's this video game streamer by the name of Asmongold, and he's not a political streamer. He just like is a gamer. Like he just plays video games and streams video games. And Vosh did a thing about Asmongold, which I'm like, why would you? Asmongold is not a political person. You should not really have an opinion on Asmongold politically, because he's literally like, I play video games for a living. I have social positions, I suppose, in regards to that, but he's not like, he's not trying to be political, really. He's just trying to speak whatever truth he has. And he's not really a debate bro, and he's not really getting involved in any of this. And so for Vosh to even do a clip on this guy is like, why? And so Asmongold turns around and basically just takes all of the clips of Vosh outing himself as a pedo and a horsecock lover, and just like sends it into his stream. And it's like, if non-political, like low-level streamers are able to do that, then that's kind of the end of it for you, Vosh. But the problem is that from the political standpoint, from the standpoint of his of the FBI, that's a success. Because if you can connect to the zeitgeist and to the idea that people who are on the left are like Vosh, are these like creepy weirdos who exist in this like creepy weirdo space, then you can detract, then you can pull people away from the left, which is the goal with Vosh. That's the whole goal, is to pull people away from the left and keep them more into the Democratic Party, right? Which is like, now is basically the fascist right, essentially. And I mean, they probably have him blackmailed. I mean, I guess there's a limit to, but look, like, a love of sexuality and sex is not a left-right issue. I think that's really where I'm gonna come down on it. That's why I don't like, oh, it came out that somebody likes porn. Oh, okay. Like, literally right-wingers have like mistresses, and like all these guys are raping women. Like Matt Gaetz had a case where he was sex trafficking. Like, everyone is a sexual deviant, right? Like, everyone is a sexual deviant. Everyone has like some kind of sexual thing that lives underneath. Like what you think when Noam Chomsky and his wife are alone in a room together, they're not getting completely freaky. Like really, like let's be like totally grown up about this. Like, you think that when like Martin Luther King and Chris Hedges get behind closed doors with their sexual partner, they're not like completely losing their mind? You think that the monkey aspect of sexuality and sexual, like, you think that monkey goes through a moral lens before it wants to have sex? Like, it's I just don't like. Yeah. Like, when it comes to that conversation, the conversation of human sexuality and pornography, it's like, yeah, everybody's in that. Everybody's in that. And I do think that to play the game of like, oh goodness, I would never. I live in the high-minded. No, you don't. Like, no, you don't. You don't, right? Your tastes are over here, their tastes are over here, and the internet is this like fire hose of humanity, and it's like everybody's like just walking through it. The line is, are you smart enough to understand that you shouldn't be trying to push? Like, do you understand the difference between right and wrong? Do you understand that when you see this kind of stuff and you go, oh yeah, that's yeah. I'm not gonna send that into the universe. I'm not gonna try to change the society to make it more adherent to my sexual tastes. I'm going to understand issues like consent. I'm going to understand issues like that, where like, and consent is the big one. And consent is the big conversation that we need to be having in regards to this conversation. But like, Vosh very clearly shows that he doesn't understand what consent is. And that he is not really interested in the issue of consent. That's it. That's it. So I think I'm going to end this section of the Vosh dunk by saying he's an FBI informant. He's admitted to being an FBI informant who works on behalf of the FBI in order to besmirch leftists and socialists and pull people away from trade unionism, communism, even anarchism, and get them into the Democratic Party. That's his job and that's his role. And like, in regards to like the FBI blackmailing point, like, I feel like if you're in a position of power, the FBI is going to be able to blackmail you. Like, it just sort of depends on whether or not you're willing to Like, and honestly, like, I just feel like, did you know that? Did you know that somebody had porn on their computer? Uh-huh. So they're alive and they have a computer, right? And don't bullshit me. Don't bullshit me. All right. Enough of this Vosh bullshit. Enough of this Vosh bullshit. I'm behind on the chat. Let's take a look. So, oh yeah, somebody posted something here. Somebody did have one more comment about Vosh. Resist said, "Oh, he's also supported by the DNC PAC called Progressive Victory, founded by an Obama staffer with a $500,000 grant from an anonymous foundation. Progressive Victory has the best streamers involved, like Destiny, Vosh, and Zionist Wick." Is that true, dude? Hold on, that's actually huge. I didn't know that. If that's true, uh, 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 Progressive Victory. What is this? PAC. Destiny is a bigger deal than Vosh, so like, straight up, like, as easy to find as this. A political action committee focused on trying to combine online activists, creators, and volunteers with more mainstream political movements. Destiny is working with them. Various other... Oh my god, and this is on Destiny's own wiki. This is Destiny's own wiki. And he's just like, yep. Like, straight up, Destiny's like being very open about it. Like, straight up, these guys are like DNC insiders. They work with the system. Their job is very clearly to pull people away from the left and get them into the Democratic Party. And to not, under any circumstances, please do not create a third party. Do not create other political arrangements. Do not create systems of mutual aid that exist outside the Democratic Party. That's hilarious, dude. That's an awesome fact. Just the fact that Destiny is basically just like a stooge for the DNC. That's amazing. That's so fucking amazing. Vosh is literally doing fundraising for a Democratic PAC called Progressive Victory. That's amazing. That is so super amazing, dude. I need to find the Wikipedia for that. For Progressive Victory PAC Wikipedia. That's so funny. like this should tell you what's going on out in the world, right? Like, this should tell you what's happening is that all of these quote unquote leftists, right? All of these quote unquote leftists, they exist to be mouthpieces for the Democratic Party. That's what they exist to be. They don't exist in order to they don't exist to try to inform you about what's going on legitimately. They don't exist in order to try to open up the conversation. They certainly don't exist to be revolutionaries in the conversation. They don't exist for any reason other than to kill those ideas and kill those movements and funnel people into the Democratic Party. Dude, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Resist, I'm not going to click that link mainly because it's not going to get shown on the stream. I like the way I have this set up, I don't have any way to get it into the stream. So clicking on that link is pointless. And maybe ask me to search something on YouTube. Like, what should I search on YouTube? And maybe I'll do it that way. But like sending a direct link, that's pointless. Like, wow. So straight up now we can say outright, Like Destiny, Vosh. There was another one who I didn't even know his name, so I don't care. But these guys are like they're Democrats. Like they're not socialists or leftists or anything. They're Democrats. They're in the Democratic Party and they exist to kill leftist movements. That's amazing. That's so fucking amazing, dude. Thank you for that information. Thank you for that information. I'm 100% going to use that from now on. We got one guy who likes to come in. His name is Vosh Lover. I'm for sure going to bring this stuff up. Because, like... God. Yeah, Mikhail, like Richard Medhurst, Caleb Maupin, Julian Assange. Yeah, there's a honeypot type pattern. Yeah, I mean, like, look, I just think that we as a society need to get our heads out of our asses, right? Like, we found some tweets of a person saying some things in a chat of a sexual nature. Yeah. Of course you did. Like, of course you did. Don't bullshit me. Like, we as a people do need to come together and be like, no, of course you did. Like, yeah, obviously. What? Like, fucking, Hinge exists. What's that big one? Why am I blanking on that? That's annoying. Like, all of these, like, things exist. What do you think? Like, what do you think that people are doing? Right? Like, so if the story is... this streamer found having sexual conversations with a woman on the internet. Yeah? Like, and? I just feel like there's this, like, proclivity. There's this desire to, like, oh, that's enough for me to completely dump them off of everything. What are you talking about? Meanwhile, you turn around and you're fucking doing dirty sex talk and, like, looking at porn on the internet. Don't bullshit me. Like, don't bullshit me. And the only reason why the FBI and the only reason why the CIA can use this as a way to, like, besmirch them or as a way to, like, honeypot them or as a way to do any of this kind of stuff is because we're all sitting here going, gasp! The thing that I definitely do. The thing that I'm 100% doing right now as we're talking. Like, we just gotta get over ourselves, man. Like, as a people. And just be like, yeah, of course. What? A powerful person in a position of power had sex with a woman? What? What? Like, what are we, babies? Like, what are we, children? Like, come on. Like, fucking come on. It's like we're cosplaying. It's like we're all collectively role-playing in front of ourselves. Like, I would never do that thing that I definitely do. Like... And of course there's lines, but where the center of that should be, and where the center of the conversation should always be, is, did they break consent? Was there an understanding between all parties that everyone involved in the process was consenting? And as long as you can say, yeah, everybody was consenting, that consent was there and consent existed, right? Well, tough shit. Like, like maybe you do think it's skeezy and weird and creepy and odd. Maybe you do think the type of relationship that this person had with the other person was a little bit, and the power dynamic and all. Well, was everybody consenting? Tough shit. There's an age of consent for a reason. There's a moment where we say that these people are capable of consenting, and we've created this legal discourse for a reason. And it's specifically so that we all just take our hands off of these people and say, okay, you're a grown adult. You can make decisions for yourself. And if you're going to get into that situation and engage in these activities, you have the ability to give consent and you have the ability to take consent away. Right? That consent is the center of the conversation, and consent is the moment of touchdown. Right? That's the moment when we make the decision that, no, the state can get involved here, right? We can get involved in this. But if grown adults are doing crazy sex orgies or whatever they want to do, right? Tough shit. Tough shit. And whenever I see these articles float by where it's like, documents came out that showed that this person, I always look at it and I go, yeah. And the only reason they have any traction in the zeitgeist at all is because we're all pretending like we're not like that. Like we are. Come on. Come on. I'm just so tired of this fakery. I'm tired of this bullshitting stuff. Meanwhile, we literally have like DNC streamers, people who are working for the Democratic National Convention, who are working for the Democratic Party, posing as leftists. And Destiny's extra bad because people call him a leftist, but he outright calls himself a liberal. And we just kind of ignore it. It just doesn't seem to matter. Inverted writes, the vast majority of us are virgins, though. I don't know if it's the majority are virgins, but there are more virgins now than there ever has been before. That's definitely true. Which is a whole other conversation. I blame capitalism, of course, as you guys know. The central. I did not think that I would be spending 30 minutes talking about pornography on my way back. Thanks, guys. I blame you. That's what I do. I blame all of you. Yeah, Scott Ritter is a good example, right? Richard was accused of being a pedo too. Yeah, and like they'll for sure use that angle, but like we should be suspicious. We should definitely be suspicious when people start talking this way. Okay, I'm gonna move on from this. I'm gonna move on from this. Yeah, sorry, resist. I'm not going to show the clip. I'm going to move on from this. I feel like I've spent like the last 30 minutes talking about this. Yeah, it's more cancel culture. Cancel the left with sex scandals while Donald Trump grabs him by the pussy. Literally, Donald Trump. We have court documents with confessions that are outright showing that Donald Trump has raped women. Right? You are legally permitted to call him a rapist. It's not a libel. He is a rapist. It's very clear. But yeah, like, oh, did you see that this leftist liked looking at boobs? Oh! It's horseshoe stuff, really, like trying to make false equivalents between Assange and Harvey Weinstein. Yeah, there's a bit of this. Like, that's actually a really good observation, I think, Mikhail, that it is like trying to say that the mistakes, it's like the argument that gets used in the Holodomor, right? It's that same kind of argument where it's like the mistakes and errors that the Soviets make is the same as the Holocaust, right? Which is Holocaust denial, right? Or Holocaust apologetics, because it's really downplaying what the Holocaust was to pretend as though the Holodomor was a much more dramatic event than it actually was. And and it's that same kind of idea that like, oh, that guy, he catcalled a woman on the street. That's just as bad as systemically raping women. That's the same thing as Jeffrey Epstein. Like, yeah, we're a superficial society where appearances matter more than what's really going on. Yeah, it's not good. Just sweep it under the rug. Room is clean. Yeah. Radio, good to see you. Capitalism is to blame for your grandmother's gout? I'm sorry to hear about your grandmother's gout. That's deeply unfortunate to hear. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. There's more important things happening in the world for sure. Yeah, of course. Like, one of the things that I wanted to talk about a half hour ago before we went down that Vosh rabbit hole. Although I'm glad we did go down that Vosh rabbit hole, because now I know something. I know something new. I learned something now to be a more effective speaker about it. Because, like, I didn't realize that these guys were part of the Democratic Party. You know? I always sort of assumed that I assumed that they had some kind of backing. I assumed that there was something going on kind of in the background, right? But I didn't exactly know what. And now it's like, yeah, like, these guys can stream 8 hours a day because they're being paid $100,000 by the Democratic Party to be Democratic stooges, right? And Destiny and Vosh are just stooges for the Democratic Party. So, there you go. I learned something. I want to read this article. The private sector housing experiment has failed. Ottawa must now step up on social housing. For my American audience, right, we are having a major housing crisis. One of the major things that's going on in that housing crisis is a money laundering scheme where billionaires are going through. What do I think about Hassan? Let me read this article, my man, and then I'll talk about Hassan. Actually, I can say I haven't seen anything that shows that Hassan is connected to any of these organizations. If he was connected to those organizations, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he's more interested in his business than a movement. I think that's the bottom line. Is that I think that he is happy that he lives in a house and he's making the money that he's making, and he's not really going to ever do anything to destabilize that. So, a useful resource, speaking truth in a lot of cases, but yeah, but I think his motivation is what I would question. Politicians of all stripes say that housing affordability is a top priority, but few things saying much about social housing, the kinds that's needed for low-income households, is in greatest need of affordable rental housing. Good start. Good start. Eric, good to see you. Juan, I'll answer that question in a minute. Social housing is non-market housing, either publicly owned or non-profit, and substantially subsidized to ensure low-income renter households pay no more than 30% of their gross income on rent. I love it. We're so weak in the West and in the imperial core. We're so weak. In the Soviet Union, you only had to spend 4% of your income on rent. That was the maximum that they were willing to say. That, oh yeah, if you're a renter, you're going to spend 4% of your income. Here we're arguing for 30%. We're standing here being like, yeah, people shouldn't pay more than 30% of their income. Like, we're such simps. We're such slavish simps for capital. We're just like, oh, Mr. Landlord, please take all my money, Mr. Landlord, while you do nothing of value whatsoever. Oh, Mr. Landlord, you live in Cancun, and you have a property management company that you pay because we give you all of our money. No, you're a valuable asset in all of this. Like, it's so obvious that we're like, a big part of the reason why we're in the trouble that we're in is because we're just completely enamored with capital, and we're completely it's like we have Stockholm syndrome. We're just like, oh, I love my capital. Oh, of course landlords should get 30% of my income for doing nothing of value whatsoever, right? So yeah, of course they're going to abuse us, because we're just like, thank you, sir, can I have another? Like, of course we're going to do this. Like I recently did a TikTok video talking about how feudal serfs worked less hours or less days than we did, right? That there's been MIT studies that have been done. I could bring them up if you'd like, where they talk about, yeah, feudal serfs only worked about 150 days out of the year, right? And you take a look and you read the article of why that's the case, and the reasoning is because the feudal serfs wouldn't do work anymore. They literally would work the 150 days, and if you tried to make them work more, they'd just be like, shut up. No. Like, we're not going to. Right? Like, that's how you get things for yourself. That's how you get stuff as a society, is you look at these capitalists and these landlords and these pathetic parasites who are psychopathic, and you say, go fuck yourself. Get out of here. No. We're not interested. Zero. Nope. No. Not interested. Wrong. Right? That's how you actually get stuff. Like the idea that we're asking for 30% when it should be 4%, like, get the fuck right out of here with this. Like, why are we so weak? Why are we such weak sauce leftists where we're just like, yeah, but, oh, Mr. Capitalist, is it okay if I take an extra day of Mr. Fuck you. Fuck you. Like, Yep, 2 things I think everybody should have: a house, a healthcare insurance, and a job. I would argue that just food and shelter. Like, that's it. Food and shelter. Once food and shelter is taken care of, just let it ride. So this already pissed me off, this article. I'm a researcher and a member of the Coalition of Organizing Committee. We have synthesized research that tells the story of a 30-plus year experiment aligned with the rise of neoliberalism. to rely on the private sector to respond to all housing needs. It hasn't worked. Yeah, no shit. Our examination of housing policy in liberal democracies, including Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and throughout Europe, leads us to conclude, as does the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that social housing is a key part of past and future housing policy. We conclude that if we are to begin to make progress on increasingly daunting challenges, the Government of Canada will need to do two things. Number one, get ready for the weak sauce. Create a minimum of 50,000 new rent-geared-to-income social housing units each year for 10 years, starting now. These units should be targeted for the lowest income renter households and those experiencing homelessness, and should have rents permanently set at no more than 30% of household income. Invest now in the acquisition, construction, operation, and maintenance of new and existing public, nonprofit, and cooperative owned housing that meets the unique and varied requirements of low-income renters and people experiencing homelessness. We should seize these people's assets. Like, there are entire buildings in the city of Toronto that are essentially Airbnbs and just like empty properties, right? We should seize these assets for sure. And I'm glad to see that there is anybody in the conversation who's willing to kind of scratch the surface of it. Because, like, invest now in the acquisition, construction, operation, and maintenance of new and existing, but like yeah, seize these properties, right? And don't apologize for it. Like, don't apologize for it. When the capitalists cry about it, you know what you should do? Haha, losers. Haha, we're solving a problem that you losers were parasiting onto and that you are psychopathically throwing people into the streets over. Haha, I'm glad you're crying. Haha. That's what we should do to these crying losers when they start crying about us seizing their properties and throwing them. And we're back. And we're back. My OBS Studios reconnection successful. Somebody in the chat, let me know if I'm still here. Let me know if I'm still here, okay? I love that they're acknowledging, just scratching the surface. We recognize that adding 50,000 additional units annually is not nearly enough. Yeah, you need to seize assets from people. Instead, we recommend this as a minimum, based on the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's projected need to expand overall supply by building 5.8 million homes over the next decade. We estimate that because 33.5% of households are renters, 194,300 of this supply should be rental, since the CMHC has found that approximately a quarter of renters are paying more than 30% of income on rent. Yeah, a quarter of renters are paying more than 30% income on rent. I went through a period of time, before I got a roommate in here, I was spending 70% of my income on my rent. Like, this rental market is gross. And like, it's grotesque. And what happened to me, right? I was with a partner. I was with somebody. We moved into an apartment together so that we could split the cost of the rent. So it wouldn't be 70% of our rent. So we were both spending 30% of our income on rent, right? And then we split up, right? Split up right before COVID, right? And she moved out, went somewhere else. I'm living here by myself. Okay. So I went through a period of time where it's like, oh man, I'm spending 70% of my income on rent. Oh God, that's a problem. So I'm going to move out, right? This place is too big for me. I'm going to move out. And you know what happened? Rent skyrocketed so swiftly that if I wanted to move into a smaller place in a worse location, I'd end up spending more than I'm spending now, right? That's what happened to me, right? That's what's happening to everybody. And so my only solution became, well, got to get a roommate. And so now I got a roommate, right? And I'm making it happen, and I'm making it work, and I'm making do. But what I'd really love is to just move into a bachelor suite, right? But I'm not going to spend $2,000 a month, right? And why is that all happening? Because we really got to cater to psychopathic billionaires who are laundering their money through our housing market. That's why it's happening. Like, we're a dim-witted people. Like, we're dim-witted. When what we should be doing is setting up a crown corporation, right, that exists specifically to ensure that this does not exist. Like, the idea that this exists shows you how dim-witted we are. Do you think maybe people will try to funnel their money through a housing market that's just open? Nah, people won't do that. Okay. This more than triples the target in the federal government's national housing strategy, redirects the focus from modest affordability to deeply affordable. This amount is relatively consistent with calls to double the number of social housing units to more closely align with the OECD average. Like, we have to double the number of social housing units to begin reaching the average for the OECD. Can't imagine why our economy is collapsing. Can't imagine why things are going so poorly for us. New social housing supply requires capital investments for construction so that new housing can be built, and for acquisition so existing properties can be purchased and repurposed or renovated as needed. I love that these guys are talking about this as if it's like, yeah, we'll negotiate with these capitalists. That's what we'll do. We'll negotiate. Like, literally walk up to these guys and be like, we're taking your properties. Get fucked. Oh, if you do that, then they'll leave. Good. I hope they do. I really hope they do. It'd be so great. It'd be so great if all of these capitalists just up and left. That would be so great. It would make our lives so much easier. Honestly, if all these capitalists just decided, well, if you do that, then we'll just sell all of our assets and leave. Good. Great. I hope you do. Please, faster. God, faster. It's like threatening. It's like a parasite threatening me that if you take that medicine, you'll expel the parasites, and you won't have any parasites left in the system. Social Housing and Human Rights Coalition members are now reaching out to MPs across the country to make the case that more social housing is needed. It's a challenge. Despite the evidence, some are quick to tell us they don't believe social housing is needed. Right, because we're a psychopath culture full of dimwits. And that governments should simply incentivize private sector developers and remove red tape. The solution to our problem is to do the problem more. But our research shows no evidence this will work. Yeah, because it's not driven by evidence. Like, it's a system of extraction and abandonment. Like, that's what this is. Private sector solutions were the focus of cost-shared federal, provincial, and territorial initiatives beginning in 2001 through the Affordable Housing Framework Agreement, but the emphasis on limited capital grants per unit resulted in modest development of units renting at 80% of average market rents. Yeah, because what actually happens if you get into a public-private partnership, what they call a public or a private-public partnership, or a public-private partnership, or as I like to call it, fascism, if you get into that and you give the private sector money, right, they're just going to take the money and pocket it. And then they'll be like, we'll just slap up some toothpicks and call that a house. Yeah, look, we built a house. Thanks for the free money. Can we have more free money? Because that's what these people do, right? They're parasites, right? They'll hold their, like, it's so odd that people who are saying, man, I would like to have food and shelter, are the ones that are asking for handouts, while corporations literally stand there being like, more money, please, for nothing. More money for nothing, please. Ugh. The shortage of truly affordable rental housing across Canada has only worsened because governments have not been willing to invest in social housing. Yes, it is expensive in the short term, and it is getting more expensive each year, but as demonstrated by Finland, a country that has remained committed to social housing investment, it pays off in the long term. Yeah, capitalists don't think about the long term. They don't care. They money me now. Money me good. Like, that's as far as they're willing to go. The Finns have tackled homelessness like no other country. They know that without public investment in safe, stable housing, people are at a higher risk of having poor mental and physical health, poor education outcomes, weaker labor market attachment, and a host of other issues that governments must attend to. There are many strategies needed simultaneously to address affordable housing. The expansion of social housing supply is one. But calls are all too often ignored by governments, turning to the private sector for low-cost, quick fixes that continue to fail those greatest in need. Yeah, I think this article, did not ball nearly hard enough. Good, like, evidence and, all that kind of stuff, but really, giving politicians and capitalists more credit than they're due. These people are psychopaths who do not care about the suffering they cause in the society. Politicians are their courtiers who work exclusively for power and don't give a shit about you or anything you care about. We should seize these people's assets and tell them to go fuck off. That's what we should be doing. Until I start seeing more serious articles that are of that tone, that are literally just saying to the capitalists, like, I don't think that you're a valid or interesting group of people and you should be omitted from our thought processes. Like, we should just seize your assets and you should just fuck off. Like, we should nationalize the grocery distribution chains, right? We should nationalize Loblaws. And when Galen Weston stands up and cries about it, we should mock him and laugh at him, right? That's where we're at now. And until I start seeing like Globe and Mail articles about that, well, it won't be the Globe and Mail because that's David Thompson. But until I start seeing the conversation actually being like, yeah, like these people are worthless. They provide no value whatsoever. In fact, they provide negative value to the society in many ways. We should seize their assets, declare their experiment a failure, chase them out of the conversation, stop negotiating with them entirely, stop pretending like they have credibility or authority to be even heard or listened to, and move on with successful strategies that we know will work. Like, until we do that, like, it's like we're trying to negotiate with the parasites in our guts. No, take the medicine, shit them out. That's how you deal with parasites. You don't negotiate with parasites. You don't say, we'll give the parasite a little bit to eat, and then that'll rise all the tides of the boats. No, you take the fucking medicine and you shit the parasite out. That's the way we should be talking about capitalists. And until we start talking that way, openly and in public and in print, nothing's going to change. Because the capitalists are just going to be like, oh, you're complaining? And they're not going to care. Yeah, just wait till you can't pay rent at any price. Yeah. I mean, that's the basic Marxism, right? Eventually, the wage earner, his wage is no longer capable of buying the goods that are withheld from him, right? Long Defiant, I'm going to answer one question up here before I answer your question, okay? Because Juan has been patiently waiting. Juan asked early, are you someone who believes in the socialization of women in socialism? I don't think I understand the question, Juan. So I'm not going to start opining on it because I don't think I fully understand what you mean. Like, the socialization of women in socialism? Like, I think that every single individual should be free. Should have food and should have shelter, and then should essentially be left alone. And whatever needs that person requires, like anything that is put on the back of a human from the universe, should be accommodated by the society. So in terms of women, women have periods. Have you noticed? Women have periods. And so we as a society should accommodate that. Like, the privatization of women's or feminine products, right? The privatization of this kind of stuff, I think, is gross and disgusting. The fact that we don't accommodate for the reality that every woman in our society experiences a period, I think is weird and strange and gross. It's weird that we tell people who are in pain and bleeding to get to work. That's weird and strange and odd, and we should definitely accommodate that. And if any man stands up and starts saying, like, well, that means women get more time off, and how is that, they should be openly mocked and ridiculed and kind of treated as a pariah in the society, because God himself has said that this is something that women are going to experience. And if we're not going to actually sit there and accommodate it, then we are creepy and weird. And so that's mainly my position, that, like, the universe has said we need food, the universe has said we need shelter, the universe has said we need water, and for women, the universe has said you're going to experience this menstrual cycle. And for anybody to withhold those things or to not accommodate those things is creepy and weird and fascist, in my view. Like, people need food, need shelter, and need accommodation. Like, it's very straightforward. So I hope that kind of answers your question. But if not, hit me back, okay? Long Defiant. when robots take all the jobs, see Tesla's Optimus, what social change do you think will happen? What can leftists create today that will capture the resulting social energy? What leftists need to be doing right now is creating mutual aid groups. This is something that I say for myself, and I keep saying, like, it's not enough to come here, okay? It's not enough to come here and listen to someone like me talk, right? It's not enough to listen to Hassan. It's not enough to have yourself radicalized internally. It's not enough to be living in the society as a radicalized leftist. You have to reach out to the people around you, directly around you, your neighbors, your coworkers, and you have to begin creating mutual aid systems. The threat of automate, like what the capitalists will absolutely do to us is abandon us. That's absolutely true, right? It's absolutely true. Oh, what social change do I think will happen? This is what I think will happen: is that the capitalists will lay everybody off. They'll tell us to go get fucked, to go get different jobs and work harder, right? Become an entrepreneur. That they're already telling us that. They're already saying become an entrepreneur, right? Just who cares that Elon Musk has billions of dollars of government support, right? You just go do it yourself, whatever, and they'll just throw you out onto the street, right? They'll have the robot do the job. You'll live in the street in a tent. The people who are involved in AI and robotics see this coming, right? There's a lot of anxiety. If you look at like basic income groups, there's a lot of people who are in the AI industry, like a lot of Silicon Valley people have this kind of attitude of basic income and all this kind of, and they talk that way. But the truth is that they're not the ones that are going to make those decisions. It's going to be the money people, and the money people are going to look at humans and go, "Oh, they can live in the street and fuck off," and we'll put a little wall around them with cops, right? And we'll beat them up with cops because we're psychopaths, right? I think that's what's important to remember, is that the people who are at the very top of this chain, the actual decision makers, not the politicians, because the politicians just do what they're told by the actual decision makers. The decision makers are psychopaths, right? That and like literally every single time we've studied this issue of when you get a certain amount of wealth, what happens to your mental health? Well, the answer is you start acting like a psychopath or somebody who has brain damage, right? This is the there was an article from Psychology Today that I actually read on my TikTok recently, where it's like straight up the research shows that if once you start to accrue a certain degree of power, you start to act like you have brain damage and you lose the ability to have empathy. You lose the ability to have that. And we're not discussing that seriously in our society. We are still talking to the billionaire class and to the capitalist class as if they are rational, capable, they have empathy, any of that kind of stuff. We're still talking to them as though they are capable of understanding basic human empathy, when we need to stop that completely. We need to accept the fact, the hard scientific reality that these people are psychopaths, that they act like psychopaths because they are psychopaths, that their interest is not in creating a communal good. They'll argue that in order to gaslight people into letting them continue to act like psychopaths. But the truth is that I think many of these people, when they throw people out on the streets, giggle about it and love it, right? That they go have little sex orgies and they get off on the fact that they're impoverishing people, right? So when they automate, sure, they'll walk out in public and be like, well, we're automating, so we'll have to do something, but they won't, right? They won't. So they'll throw us out onto the street. They'll impoverish millions of people. Tent cities will explode, right? They'll funnel drugs into those tent cities in order to incapacitate people, and they'll surround them with cops in order to beat the shit out of them, like they're currently doing now, right? Like they're currently doing now. Like that's it. That's it. So what do we need to do as leftists and socialists and as not psychopaths? We need to begin connecting to each other on a one-to-one level We need to be unionizing our workplaces. We need to be creating systems of mutual aid. We need to be taking over municipal politics. We need to be taking over. We need to be taking over on the local level. That's what we need to be doing, because our society has been taken over by psychopaths, and those psychopaths are going to act like psychopaths. So I hope that answers your question. A lot of people are saying that when robots take all the jobs, everything will become so cheap that anyone can afford it and there will be no social change. Yeah, but how do you get wages into people's hands? Like, no one will be able to work, right? And the system is based, it's a wage slave system. Work or starve, right? So if you don't have any money, like, it doesn't matter how cheap the object is if you have zero, right? DM, good to see you. Yeah, Eric, I mean, it's so hard to reach out to people because people don't actually care. Or at least I think there's a lot of people who kind of like, I think there's a lot of people who understand that they're not actually going to be touched by this, or that by the time the issue becomes, they believe that by the time the issue becomes prevalent, they'll be dead. So they've just got no skin in the game. You got to start talking to like people who are 20. Like, people who are 20 understand this intrinsically. Like this is like, stop looking at the boomers. Just stop. Because even if you find a sympathetic one, they're going to be like, oh, well, you better do something about that. Right? And then they're just going to continue living their life because they got set up by the system and they're benefiting from that. They're not going to they're not going to throw it all away. Right? So the people you need to be talking to are 20. Right? Those are the people. DM, great to be here. Good to see you, bud. What are my views about the recent Bell Media cuts in spite of receiving huge handouts by the government? My take is the CEOs are stealing from the company coffers. Yeah, which, yep. Like, that's the structure of the piece. And the fact that Trudeau came out, I think the most charming aspect of it is when Trudeau came out and was like, this is a garbage decision. Yeah, okay, Trudeau. Like, you're an unserious person. Like, did you not see this coming from the literal every other time they've done this? Like, this is, it's like pulling a lever that opens a door that puts a fist into your face, right? And like, I can understand somebody pulling that lever and getting punched in the face once, but like, we just keep pulling that lever and we're just like, well, and we just keep doing it over and over and over again. If you give money to psychopaths, right, they will go, nice, and put that money in their pocket and then destroy the people they want to destroy and then say, oh, I need money for the destruction of those people. And the government will go, oh, okay. And then they'll send Trudeau out there to be like, and then they'll give Bell more money. Like, we're ruled by psychopaths. Pretty straightforward. And until we actually, like, punish these people meaningfully, right, by arresting them, imprisoning them, and taking their assets away from them, nothing's going to change, right? As long as the corporate power structure understands that they can steal as much money as they want, destroy as much as they want, and they'll get rewarded for it, then that's the relationship that we'll live under. And until we actually take these people, put them in jail, forget where they are, take all of their assets away from them, and say, we're no longer going to do business this way ever again, nothing's going to change, right? Nothing is going to change. That's why, like, the NDP and these social democrats are so weak, because they're just going to be like, well, we could negotiate a new deal. We should arrest these people. We should put them in jail. We should forget where they are. We should take all of their assets, including their car and their house and their phone. We should make it illegal for them to own assets ever again in their life. And we should take those assets and we should nationalize them. Right? How often do you think how often do you think we would need to do that before these capitalists went, right? How many people do you think we would need to incarcerate permanently before these capitalists actually went, oh, there's consequences? Oh, there's consequences for our actions? And started acting not like psychopaths. That self-interest would kick in, right? I don't think it would take too many. Like, and the argument that says, like, well, John, if you did that, then the capitalists will leave. Good. I hope they do. Faster. Can they leave tomorrow? I'll help pack their bags. How fast can these capitalists leave? Can the parasitical, vampiric, ghoulish psychopaths leave faster? Man, I can't wait. Good. Bye. Thanks for coming. Bye. Go be a psychopath somewhere else. Bye. Ugh. Yeah, but John, who cares about science? I can't even get Christians to agree that scholars of the Bible explicitly state their Trinity isn't found in it, or was taught by Christianity for the first. Yeah, no, Christians don't read the Bible, dude. Like, they don't actually care about the Bible. It's all just like an in grouping kind of thing, right? That if the and it doesn't matter that it doesn't make any sense, right? It really doesn't. It's just a crazy. Oh, somebody asked a long time ago. Matthias, was it you? Yeah. Matthias, if you're still here, the Tucker Carlson, Putin, yeah, let's put that up. The Tucker Carlson Putin, conversation. I'm definitely going to sit down and listen to it, although it sounds like I'm pretty aware of what Putin's position is, right? And so it sounds to me like he basically just sits down and gives his position, in the way that I understand it. But I think the big takeaway for everybody, and that's whether you're against Putin or for Putin or in that position where you're like, well, let's listen, let's hear what he has to say. Everybody is coming out and saying this guy sounds cogent. He sounds aware. He sounds like he's rooted in the history of his country. He sounds like, maybe I don't agree with his position, but it sounds like he has a well thought position, right? All of these things exist in his in his ethos and in his mind. He sounds intelligent. And I'm hearing a lot of people say, can you imagine Joe Biden sitting down for a 3-hour conversation and talking about the history of his country and what's going on? Can you imagine Donald Trump sitting down for a 3-hour conversation about the history of America? Like, it just doesn't exist. And it's very clear that everybody from all positions and all sides, that what that Putin interview did is it shamed them. I think that that's really what it did. And it didn't shame them because Putin convinced them of anything. It didn't shame them because Putin changed hearts and minds. It didn't shame them because Putin was even condemning anybody or shaking rattling a saber or anything. It shamed them because they looked at their own leadership and it became immediately clear and immediately obvious that our leadership is clownish. And that clowns have taken over. And that the society generally is turning towards clownishness. Like, it really does look like... This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Is like, who cares what people like Dave Chappelle say about anything? Who cares what these comedians say about literally anything? Right? Like, that's what's gotten so odd, is that figures like Jon Stewart, John Oliver, have become like national spokespeople. And they've become national spokespeople. And they've become moral voices in the conversation. And the expectation of them is that they act as moral voices. Like, these people are living fart jokes. They are nightclub comedians. Like, Bill Maher is not a moral leader, and it is clownish to think that he should be. Right? It's clownish and odd that and a sign of our society that it's declined so dramatically that it's the clowns who are being expected to have a moral voice or a moral position. Like, it shows you how clownish our politics has become. It shows you how clownish the whole conversation has become. And it's getting really clear that we are a clownish people looking at clowns for guidance, because we have no guidance. We have no philosophers. We have no intellectuals. The intellectuals that exist that are of a higher quality, we put on the fringes on purpose, and we ignore on purpose because what they say is inconvenient to us. And instead we listen to total fucking losers, or people whose job it is just to go honk honk ha 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 ha, mainly, right? And maybe they make it sound more elocucious than that, but the only reason we think they sound so verbose, and the only reason we think they're such good storytellers, is because we've destroyed our storytellers and we've destroyed our artists. And so the only thing that's left is a guy standing on stage telling you fart jokes, right? Like, comedians will stand up and say, stand-up comedy is a uniquely American art. And it's like, stand-up comedy should not be considered an art. It should not be considered something that is the center of the culture. Standing in front of people and making them laugh, right, would not be considered an art if everybody was capable of doing it. But because we've destroyed the arts, because we've stupefied our public, because everything is so dumb, right, that instead of nightclub comedians being what they are, which is the beginning of art, right, it's become the art itself. Because if you lived in a society where everybody had this capacity to stand in front of people and tell stories and tell jokes and all that kind of stuff, then the idea that we'd all sit back and sit down and be silent while one person does it in front of thousands and thousands of people, it would just be like, what are you talking about? Well, you mean like my buddy Bill does, right? Like, that nightclub comedians would basically just go to nightclubs and be comedians in front of other comedians so that they could actually move forward and create actual art, actual theater, and actual performance, and actual stories, right? But because our artistic life is so dead in this culture, because we're so clownish, because we're so entranced by the mundane and the silly, it's elevated these people into a position that they don't belong in. So when somebody shows up who actually is of a quality of intellect and actually is intelligent and actually does have something worthwhile to say, and is in a position of authority, and they talk, it makes us realize, oh, we're a bunch of fucking clowns over here. And I think that's what the Putin Tucker Carlson interview has immediately shown. That we are clowns, listening to clowns, expecting those clowns to be anything other than clowns. And then not only that, we've also elevated our clowns into positions of power and authority where they, guess what, act like clowns. Like, Zelensky was a clown, right? And it's fine to be a clown as long as you're a clown. And as long as everybody looks at the clown and goes, what a clown. Man, that clown really made me feel better. What a clown. Love it. But we're electing clowns as president. Like, and I think that that's more or less what that interview showed everybody. That we're clowns. That Putin is what a leader looks like. An actual leader. Agree or disagree with him all you want. But it's what an actual leader looks like. Like, not Biden, not Trump, not anybody in Congress or the Senate. No governor across America, no mayor across America, nobody. Because we keep electing clowns, and we keep looking at clowns in our society as if they're supposed to be something other than total fucking clowns. Yeah, he knows his history, so they call him an imperialist. Yeah, I mean, if like, words don't mean anything, right? You just throw the word authoritarian into something, and people are supposed to go, authoritarian! Oh, authoritarian! Which, near as I can tell, is they pass laws, and they expect people to follow those laws. That seems to be what authoritarian actually means, right? So words don't mean anything anymore. Yeah, George Orwell. Yeah. Americans can't have that sense of national history without retching. I mean, I do think that there is something to that, Long Defiant, that the history of America is so brutal, right? So you either have to be completely delusional and demented, or you have to really come to terms with some very serious stuff that's going on, right? Yeah, I think that's a narrative that may be starting to gain more shape. Biden's senility, his inability to do the job. I expect they may declare him non-compos mentis officially soon. Yeah, we'll see. Like, Biden just exists as that old... I think what the Democrats are terrified of, right? And you can see that with the conversation we were having earlier with Vosh and Destiny and all of that. That the Democrats are terrified of what's going to happen once the Clintonian guard is unelectable, right? And the Clintonian guard, with Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and Biden, right, are in that Clintonian guard. But that Clintonian guard is steadily becoming unelectable. Like, Hillary Clinton couldn't get elected. Joe Biden got elected by a hair's breadth, beating, like, Donald fucking Trump. Right, like that. This is how bad the Clintonian guard has become in the DNC. Is that that Trump is actually a credible threat, right? That Trump is actually a credible threat, and so after Biden, though, they don't know where to go, right? They don't know who to support. They don't know who to put up there, because you have the Bernie Sanders crowd, the AOC group, right? And that's threatening the Clintonian guard, right? And that energy has gone towards the Sanders kind of coalition and what's called the squad inside the DNC. And so the Clintonians, the corporate power structure, mainly just corporate fascists, they don't know where to go, and they don't know who to turn to. And so they would rather put a corpse in front of us that is electable, that will say yes sir to the corporate fascist power structure, than even a modest reformist like Bernie Sanders, right? Like, Bernie Sanders is not a revolutionary. He's a modest reformist. That's what he is. And should he or anybody in the squad attain power, that's exactly what they'll do. It's just mild, moderate piecemeal reformism. And so, but that's terrified them. They don't know what to do. So they'll continue putting Biden in front of us as long as we keep voting for him. Yeah, I think I'm going to listen to the Tucker Putin interview tonight. I don't think there's going to be any curveballs. You know what I mean? Like, I think I'm going to, like, I'm so entrenched in that political world that I just don't think I'm going to hear anything that's going to make me go, oh, wow, whoa. You know what I mean? So that's why I haven't really been like, I gotta sit down and listen to this. Oh my God. Because I just think it's going to be like, yep, that's the thing that I've been saying. Eric, I'm not going to rehash the Vosh and Destiny. The big revelation is that Vosh and Destiny are part of the Democratic Party, that they are funded directly by the Democratic Party through a super PAC. That was something that Resist over on Twitch showed me to be the case. Somebody new came into the Twitch and said something. Hawkeye, good. Hawkeye Pierce, love that. Do 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 do, 'cause suicide is painless. Yeah. Do you think that Tucker was wrong to interview Putin? No. I mean, Tucker's a stooge. Like, Tucker's kind of a loser, but, like, if it is the most uncontroversial thing in human existence that someone sits down and talks to any world leader about anything. Like, that to me, like, if you're sitting there thinking that they shouldn't have interviewed Joe, then what are you talking about? Like, what are you afraid of? What's the scary thing? The only reason you don't want to listen to your enemies is because you're afraid your enemies are right. Like, that's it. And if that's the case, then maybe you should go through the difficult work of self-analysis in order to ensure that your position is stable. Right? Yeah, Tucker's trying to revive his career, tried to appeal to the Trumpies. Yeah, I'd agree with that. That, like, I do think that Tucker is a careerist, first and foremost, and he's willing to do things in order to get his career. But he's not the first guy to interview Putin, right? Like, he's just not. So, to me, that's completely uncontroversial. Trump gave Russia the green light to do whatever they want to NATO countries. I don't think that's true at all. Like, I don't think that's true at all. Eric says, I watched the Putin interview. You will learn some interesting facts, but nothing fundamentally new. I haven't finished watching, but if I can break down. Yeah, I mean, like, it'll be interesting to hear it come out of Putin's mouth. And that's what'll be interesting. Oh, yeah, please, Hawkeye, if you've got a quote from Trump saying that Russia's got the green light to do whatever they want to NATO countries. Like, Trump is actually not pro-NATO, right? Like, Trump's position is that America should get out of NATO and that NATO should be a European thing alone and that Europe should fund its own military. And why are we funding Europe's military and all this kind of stuff? Because, I mean, Trump's kind of dumb, right? He doesn't really understand what NATO is and why it exists. And doesn't understand the role of, like, America has done such an enormous, powerful job of alienating the rest of the world that that America has to do everything it can to just shore up its own allies and its own alliances, right? Here's the quote that Hawkeye's posting. Yeah, let's look at this. Hawkeye says, this is a Trump quote. And one of the presidents of a big country and stood up, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay. You're delinquent. He said, yes, let's say that happened. This is so Trump. Dude, like, it's so tough. Like, other presidents, you quote other presidents, and it's like this eloquent, like, very, like elocucious, well thought out, structured thing. With Trump, it's like, and one of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay. You're delinquent. He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You gotta pay. You gotta pay your bills. What a fucking thug. Yeah, I mean, that's just scare tactics, right? Like, that's a scare thing. Like that. Yeah, he doesn't know how NATO works. Well, he doesn't know what NATO's for either, right? He doesn't understand NATO. Like, he doesn't understand it. And, like, I think the conversation about NATO is an interesting conversation. Ashton, thank you so much for the donation, my man. I appreciate it. Read the book The Reluctant Communist. I have not, but I am interested in literature. I'm just about done with the works of Lenin, The Reluctant Communist. I've got about 5 more hours on an audiobook for the works of Lenin, and I'm almost done with that. What's this? Ooh. The Reluctant Communist is a U.S. Army sergeant stationed in South Korea. Well, that sounds interesting. An American soldier defects to North Korea to avoid a death sentence from the U.S. Army. Wow. That's a cool story right there. Yeah, compared to Trump, Bush Jr. is eloquent for sure, Timothy. Good to see you, by the way, bud. The but Bush Jr. had some he like if you take a look at his presidential run, his first presidential run, if you take a look at that and like the first couple of years he was in office, he was actually quite eloquent. He really like he knew how to talk and he understood how to do the job. As his presidency went on, he started to decline. His mental there's a pretty good argument that he has, I forget what the disease was, but some kind of mental disorder, and that he went into kind of a cognitive decline. Not nearly as bad as what Biden's experiencing. The Reluctant Communist, my dissertation, court-martial, and 40-year imprisonment in North Korea. Wow. Okay. I'm going to take a look at that for sure. Because that sounds 232 pages. That sounds wild, my man. Like, for real. That sounds like... Jeez Louise. Okay. Progressive victory. Fuck this shit. Actually, I still want to put that up. Yeah, I mean... Oh, that's okay, Timothy. I understand. Life takes us all away. Charles Robert Jenkins partially defected to avoid Vietnam. I mean, for God's sakes, like... What a ridiculous period of time in American history. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have been alive through the Vietnam War and the draft and that whole thing. Like just a disaster, a disaster from every angle that you look at it. That and it's continued to be a disaster for America. That all it really resulted in, from the American perspective, was that finally China capitulated, allowed foreign capital into its border. We handed China all of our manufacturing, so we got some like cheap TVs and some cheap technology out of it. But we impoverished our own country about it, right? Like the Vietnam War and the Laos-Cambodia War and the North Korea War, like that whole period of time, that whole period of war was a disaster for everybody, except for like 10 guys. Like, that's all. Amit, hello, comment. New look? No, not a new look. I think my beard is just like... My hair is just growing out. That's all. I am going to go get a haircut soon. Yeah, when Bush Jr. screwed up his words, he was often able to save himself and make his misspeaking look endearing. Yeah, funny and self-aware, if a little dumb. Yeah, and I think as it went on, especially after the Iraq catastrophe, they came to understand that it's better to be thought of as dumb than it is to be thought of as malicious. And so so I think he started playing it up. I think he came to understand that it's just better to stand in front of people and be like, well, I'm just a down-to-earth country boy who says, who will say some things that don't make no sense sometimes, I'm just a simple-minded country chicken. Yeah, they'll learn the lesson that fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I ain't gonna get fooled again, right? Like it's. I think that he just came to understand that it's better to be thought of as stupid than fascistic. That if the American people actually understood that what Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld did in Iraq was because they're malicious psychopaths, and not because they're yuckles dumb, then there could be something serious that would happen, right? Like George Bush should go to the Hague, right? He should be tried as a war criminal, right? This whole folksy hayuckles thing he's got going on is an act. Like it's a part of who he is, sure, but he definitely like plays it up so that people will just be like, "Oh, W, he's just a dummy. He tried his best. He just fucked it all up. What a dummy dumb hayuckles." Instead of going like, no, they purposefully invaded Iraq, murdered a million people, stole their oil because they're malicious psychopaths, which they are. Like the Bush administration, all of them should go to the Hague. Like these people are malicious psychopaths, and there's a reason why the Republican Party has bounced off of that and ended up in Trump territory, right? Because Trump was the first guy to stand up and actually say that Iraq, in the Republican caucus, that Iraq was a clusterfuck. It shouldn't have happened, right? Emmett writes, I didn't get you. China was unwilling to take our manufacturing. No, they weren't unwilling to take our manufacturing. They were completely willing to take our manufacturing during the Dengist period, right? That's why they opened up foreign investment. That's why they opened up their borders to us, is to end the war, right? Remembering that Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Korea all share a border with China, and they are currently they were being bombed by an organization who is standing in front of you saying, we are staunching the spread of communism. China is communist. And so to end that conflict, to end that war, they negotiate a peace deal that includes opening up their border to foreign investment. But why was China unwilling to open borders in the first place? That is a good question, right? You're plunging into the heart of the massive debate, the ongoing debate, frankly, it's still happening between what's called Maoists and Dangists. That Mao, that Mao and Maoists fundamentally believe that the system of capital should be fought tooth and nail through war. That's their fundamental belief. That Western Marxists will pick up Marx and see revolution, overthrow the government, all of this kind of stuff, and they'll look at modern day China and they'll say, well, there's any amount of capitalism and any amount of private investment in China's borders, and so we should have a revolution and we should support Maoists to get rid of this kind of stuff. Whereas what the Dangists will say is, okay, we don't want to do war anymore, right? We don't want to be at war with America anymore. That the Maoists, you got to remember that the Maoists came up as a revolutionary force and threw imperialists out of their borders with force and violence. That they fought a war and won, right? And so the Maoist position is continue fighting that war. Continue fighting that war because we will win. If we continue fighting that war, we will win. And a new movement came up from underneath the Maoists, headed by Deng, that said, we can continue the communist project forward without war. That we can declare peace, we can make concessions, and we can continue the project of communism forward without needing to constantly be sending our people into war and constantly be fighting this war. And I think especially it became like you think about the carpet bombing of Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the carpet bombing of North Korea, like these things take existential tolls, right? And it became a standstill and kind of a stalemate. And Mao wasn't really able to make inroads anymore. That the border of China had been like, that's the border now, and the Americans were not going to let the Chinese through. And while the Chinese cities themselves were likely safe because of China's overwhelming military capacity, and America would be opening itself up to all kinds of, they'd be opening a genie from the bottle. It wears on people. I think it exhausts people. And so I think the Chinese wanted to move away from war, which means moving away from Maoism into Dangism, which Dangism is negotiating peace and compromise. So if you're a Maoist, your position is fight the capitalists tooth and nail no matter what. That even a single drop of capitalism means that what you're doing is no longer capitalist, is no longer communism. That's the Maoist position. If you take a single dropper and you drop it, if there's one business, if there's one organization that employs 2 people, and that's a private industry, then the entire project can no longer be called communist. That's the Maoist position, and the position of many Western Marxists, because it's like it's a purity thing. It's a fundamentalist thing. I encounter these guys all the time, where they read Marx and probably haven't read Lenin, Mao, or Deng, and they read Marx, and they look over at China and they see that, oh, China has any amount of capitalism, therefore, and draw and don't pay any attention to the history of China, don't pay any attention to what the history of communism or the labor movement or anything. All they see is Marx describe capitalism, and they see any amount of that in the borders of China. And so now they can make big, gigantic proclamations about how we need to have a war in China. Meanwhile, the Chinese are going like, okay, yeah, we did that. We did have a war. We had a revolutionary war where we took over China through revolutionary force. And we found that that war had a border, right? And could only take us so far. And so they transitioned. They didn't have to transition. They could have continued the culture of war and continued the war, but they decided not to. They decided to declare peace, capitulate, allow a certain amount of foreign investment into the borders of China, with the hope, and it's been successful, more or less, that the Chinese government will not be taken over by capital. That the government is still run as a dictatorship of the proletariat and has not become a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. That's the major distinction, and one that many Western Marxists don't understand. That as long that you can have a certain amount of capital in your border, as long as that capital is treated as a threat, has a clamp on it, right? As long as there are control mechanisms, and as long as it's understood that the long-term goal is to eliminate that from the society. But the choice that the Chinese had to face was face the American war machine or face the American system of capital. That was the choice. And they made their choice, and they're managing it. We'll see where it takes us, but so far it looks good, right? It looks good for the Chinese. And so when you ask that question, like, why was China unwilling to open the border in the first place? It's because the Maoists saw capital as a military existential threat. And it wasn't until the Dangists came up in power that they were able to say, we think that we are powerful enough now as an economy and as a society, as a culture, that we can defend ourselves from capitalist takeover if we declare peace and allow foreign investment into our borders. And so far, that has been the case. And of course, you can criticize certain things and all of that, and that's fine. But I think it's very difficult to make the argument that China has become a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. I think it's a very, very difficult argument to make. And and of course, if you're a Western Marxist and you've never read Lenin, and you've never read Stalin, you've never read Mao or Deng, and all you've ever done is treated Marx as a Bible, like a fundamentalist Bible, then you're going to miss all of that, right? And I don't make the claim to being Maoist or Dengist. I think that the better position is to just understand where these guys came from. Like, it makes all the sense in the world that the Maoists would have been skeptical of the Dengists. It makes all of the sense in the world that a people who fought a revolutionary war for the freedom of their own society would be skeptical of a political movement saying, well, why don't we negotiate? Right? Why don't we negotiate? And given the existential threat that the American military represented, I mean, negotiation seems reasonable, right? Seems reasonable. Like, this isn't, like, I'll often say on this stream that we should stop negotiating with these capitalists. Yeah, we should stop negotiating with capitalist business. We should stop negotiating with the structure of employee and employer. We should stop negotiating with that kind of stuff. But the truth is that America had, during that period of time, overwhelming military force that they were using on the border of China, right? So there's just compromises that need to happen, and you need to acknowledge that reality exists, right? Which many Western Marxists don't. They don't acknowledge that reality exists, which makes them fundamentalists, right? That there are practical solutions and practical things. Fiddleford, good to see you. Huxia is some good reading. Yeah, Huxia is on my reading list. I'm just finishing up with Lenin now. I kind of feel like I want to do a Stalin thing. I want to go into Stalin's writings a little bit more specifically. And then I feel like I want to do Mao and Deng more, and Xi Jinping more thoroughly than I have done. Like, I've done what I would describe as cursory research, but I'd like to read more, and I'd like to know more about what these guys are actually writing. But Huxia is definitely up there for me. Like, anybody who's willing to sit down, like any leader of a country that's willing to sit down and actually write something, right? That's why Pol Pot's, like, people will throw Pol Pot in my face and be like, what a joke. Like, the guy was so obviously, like, not only was he dealing with a catastrophe in his own country, but he was so obviously a opportunist. Like, so clearly. That, like, what did he write? What did he contribute? Fucking nothing. As well as Finnish Bolsheviks' cover on Stalinist environmentalism. It sounds like modern ecologist stances, but undeveloped. Sure. Mikhail says, I don't think it's correct to have too much of a binary view that a pacifist approach is better or a pugilist approach is better. It's about the context and historical constraints. That's exactly right. Right? That's exactly right. That you can be an ideologue, and you'll find this is historically true, that people will be ideologues until they can't, right? Until it just no longer holds any weight. Where, like, if you're a neoliberal, here's a great example from our own country, Stephen Harper, right? That Stephen Harper's a neoliberal, right? Believes in the free market, that the free market will decide. But Stephen Harper also passed the childcare benefit in Canada. That's not neoliberalism. That's not free market, right? And it's very simply because we were having a crisis, a child poverty crisis in Canada, and there was a very clear solution as to how to alleviate that crisis. And so they just did it, right? So your ideology can take you places and give you ideas and send you places, but sometimes it really is just like, just solve the problem. Just solve the problem, right? And there are very obvious ways to solve certain problems that don't exist. Like, if you're a free market capitalist and a war breaks out and people are starving in the streets while you have grocery stores full of food, distribute ration cards. Shut up. Like, what are you talking about? Like that, and you'll find that that's usually the case. That these ideologies tend to fall away when practical solutions are required. And that's more or less, I think, the argument between Maoists and Dangists in China is that the Maoists were practically minded initially because they were fighting a war and being successful at fighting that war. But eventually their practical mindset became ideologically driven. That all we can win, the communist struggle can be won through war. And the Dangists said, I don't think so. I think that there's another aspect to this and another layer of this. And frankly, it looks as though the Dangists have been proven right. It's possible that China will turn a corner and become like a major capitalist imperialist power. It's possible, but I don't see it. Eric says, Richard Wolff and Michael Hudson essentially stated that Western Marxists do not understand Marxism because they don't go beyond volume 1. Yeah. Yeah, most people don't even understand the LTV because it's actually a critique of rent economy. Yeah, I mean, like, people don't read, like, Adam Smith, for God's sakes. Like, Adam Smith is heavily critical to landlords. And, like, the only time... Like, the most embarrassing thing that has happened in recent political history in America was when all of these politicians started to talk about how we should let the invisible hand of the market decide, right? Adam Smith said the invisible hand of the market. If you actually read Smith, the only time he uses the phrase the invisible hand of the market is to say that if we unleash capitalist forces in this free market capitalist way, that it will destroy the society like an invisible hand. So the only time he's actually said the words invisible hand of the market is as a warning, as a way to say this will destroy us, right? And what happens in the political system? Well, the invisible hand of the market will decide. So we're either malicious psychopaths, which I think is accurate, or we're just dimwits, which I also think is accurate. Yeah, market ideology is so strong and rigid right now. It's idiocy. That's exactly right. Like it's become so stupid. Like it's just not capable of looking at reality any longer. As if, good to see you, my man. My worry is that the immense amount of elitist bourgeoisie consumerism that pervades the Chinese big cities will eventually infect the party and bring it all down from within, as happened in the USSR. Yeah, that's the threat, right? And there's no... Could be, right? That's the best we got. Could be. I think the only saving grace on that front, as if, is that the Chinese seem to be really aware of it. I think it's that awareness that is going to be the saving grace. That, like, one thing that I find so odd that when Western Marxists get talking about China is like it's as if China is not also having these conversations. You know what I mean? Like, we are standing here and we'll have these conversations about China amongst ourselves and be like, oh, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. I have a criticism here, I have a criticism that. And we discuss it as if China is not also having that exact same conversation, you know? And that by the time we have these conversations about China, China has had this very same conversation about itself over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? So like... There is an element, and this is not an accusation, so please don't personalize what I'm about to say. But I think that there is an element of Western chauvinism that infects the conversation. That we here in the West know best, and because we're Westerners, we know more than the people who are actually doing the system. And so I think that what that boils down to is that there is an element of, like, we've got to trust them. And we've got to kind of say that, like, okay, like, they're moving forward with what they think is right for themselves while having these conversations and dealing with Marxism and the Marxist way of doing it. And because they're much more advanced than we are, right? The Chinese are much more advanced in this way than the West is. That we should not be looking at China as we tend to have these conversations as if we're the masters and the Chinese are the students, when the inverse is the truth. That when it comes to the subject of Marxism and the arrangement of their economy through this Marxist lens, that it's the Chinese that are the masters and that we are the students, right? They're the ones that had a successful revolution. They're the ones that seized the means of production in their own society. They're the ones that built the productive force to be able to protect themselves from external capitalist threat. They're the ones that experimented and explored non-market solutions and non-market ideas, things like the Great Leap Forward, things like the Cultural Revolution. They're the ones that learned from those decisions. I wouldn't even call them mistakes, because I think that they were just decisions. They were the ones that had those conversations and moved forward. They were the ones that opened up their borders to foreign investment. They were the ones that took in the means of production from foreign countries. They were the ones that built up the productive force in their own borders. And now they are the ones that are the major trading partner with the rest of the world, while simultaneously building up enormous trade networks through the Belt and Road Initiative. And they are the ones that are building all of that up while calling themselves socialist with Chinese characteristics, while following Marxist principles and experimenting with different ways and different methods in a non-fundamentalist way. They are the ones that have achieved all of that and have built their society up along those lines, while we have never experienced a revolution. We have never overthrown our capitalist bourgeoisie class. We have never implemented, we don't have a dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, the Chinese have achieved so much more than we have along these lines. And then we have kind of the audacity, frankly, to turn around and say, well, they're not true communists, as if we have any fucking idea, as if we are the ones who decide what is or is not communism. And when we do that, we tend to do that in a very fundamentalist, well, Marx wrote. Okay, well, Marx wrote that 100 years ago, right? A lot of things have happened in 100 years. A lot of people have added to the discourse. There's been a lot more conversation. There's been experimentation. There's been things that have happened. And it seems like the Western Marxists that try to go after China usually ignore that there's been like 100 years of history. Yeah, Eric, I think this is right. Yeah, Michael Hudson and Richard Wolff criticized them. They argued that the current Chinese students are coming to America to learn and bringing neoliberal economic theories back. Yeah, because and the actual Marxists are being pushed aside, and as such, their financial institutions are being impacted. They do this because they're trying to replicate the Western success. Yeah, the Chinese are not fundamentalists. I think that's really the thing that you need to understand. Right, and it's especially bad because we here in the West have a fundamentalist. We are in a fundamentalist vein. We have a fundamentalist mindset that there is a one true God and there is a one true way to think about these things. That there is a one thing. The Chinese do not have that. Do not have that mindset. That they really are willing to experiment and willing to move forward with ideas because they have such a large population. They can run experiments in small areas, and those small areas will impact like 1 million people, right? Like pick a city block in any major Chinese city, and that's 1 million people, right? So like, they can run these ideas and run these experiments and run these thoughts. But I think one of the things to point out is that Xi Jinping himself very recently said that the Chinese universities need to turn back to Marxism and need to turn back in this way. So I do think there is an element of Chinese students going to America, neoliberalism coming back with these ideas and with these thoughts. But that's what was said about Deng. And that's what was said about the Dengist period too. And that the Chinese and the Chinese system is not going to simply allow like a bunch of kids to come into its system and say, oh, well, the Westerners said this. Okay, right? Like that kind of flows in back to my element of like we've got to actually trust the Chinese, that the Chinese have structures and institutions and ideas and thoughts. And they're not just going to send kids over to the West in order to have those kids come back and be like, this is what the West said, and so we should do it. Okay. Like, I think there's a healthy dollop of skepticism that comes out of the Chinese institutions and the Chinese structures in regards to what the West has to say. That like they're again like this is kind of like this sort of Western chauvinist attitude that it's because it like really when you think about that narrative you're basically saying the Chinese kids come back and all the Chinese go, oh, the West said so. Oh, probably not. Probably a little bit more like, oh, that's what the West said, eh? Oh, that's what the Westerners are teaching you, eh? Oh, okay. That's what the West is teaching you. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's run that experiment in a little village. Let's run that experiment in a little town. Let's run that experiment in a small city. Right? They're not going to just take something that a student is saying and put it into like work across the entire system. Because the Chinese are interested in efficiency and they're interested in what's working in their society and what's going to actually create a more unified. This I think is where the Chinese are different than us in big ways, is that the center of their ethos is about unification and not just in rhetoric. It is about how do we meaningfully unify the country so that China is a unified unit. That it's not a series of provinces that are actually negotiating with one another in constant negotiation, but rather that China is a unified unit that is itself a solid country, that it can't be balkanized or broken apart or destroyed, and it won't fall apart internally. That's what the Chinese are really interested in. Whereas the American ethos is kind of like the invisible hand will just make that happen, which is obviously bullshit. Right? It's just obviously bullshit. And so I think the Chinese are willing to like listen to what other nations have to say and listen to what these other organizations have to say and listen to this kind of stuff. And then when they come over with their thoughts and ideas, they'll go, okay, cool. That's a thought. Why don't we implement that in one place and see what happens? Because you can like, it's like when the libertarians bought a town. All these libertarians got together and bought a town and implemented their libertarian ideology and their libertarian ideas, and the town got overrun by bears. Right? Like you can find out what your economic thoughts and what your economic theories are going to do in a small scale kind of a way. Right? But that is what Michael Hudson, contact in China, said, and it's leading the financial problem in the housing market. I mean, I think that anytime you try to commodify your housing market, you're going to have a problem, right? Because like, and I don't bemoan the Chinese trying different ideas and different thoughts in their housing market, but the Chinese will always, like, I think here's the difference, okay? The Chinese will always revert back to, well, the government takes this over and we make sure that people have housing and all this kind of stuff, right? That they're willing to explore and experiment with different ideas, but they have fallback positions, right? They always have fallback positions. Whereas in America, the fallback position is, well, I guess you're homeless, right? The fallback position is the jungle. That's the fallback position in America. Not so in China. The fallback position for the Chinese is a fallback to Deng or a fallback to Mao, right? A fallback to these kind of other ideas, which gives them a safe plateau to jump off of. And so you have this like housing crisis. Okay, well, what's causing that housing crisis? Well, they brought some kids in and they had some ideas and they had some thoughts and it's just not working, right? It's causing problems as it does because it's Western capital and this is this neoliberal idea. Oh, okay, so that'll fall apart. Well, when it falls apart, it's not going to fall down to the jungle where it's pull out a knife and stab people for food and live in a tent, right? It's going to fall down to Maoism, where okay, that didn't work, so get rid of the landlords, take these properties and give them back to people, right? Because like China's a 4,000-year-old civilization. I think that's the big thing to really recognize about China. Like, it's a 4,000-year-old civilization. It has this enormous history, right? And the people of China have a sense of that history and have a sense of that, right? They don't exist in this sort of detached free market consumerist let's just eat ourselves to death kind of mode, like let's poison our food kind of thing, right? Like there's a concept of legacy. There's a concept of these sorts of things that exists within China. And just because China has a 5 or 10 year period where in this market things got tumultuous because they made a series of bad decisions, so what? And like maybe they shouldn't have done that. Okay. Well, now they know. So it's Amit writes, how could Zedong compare Israel and Taiwan? Israel is a colonizer, an aggressor, a looter. Taiwan, on the other hand, is just a little island that wants nothing but to be left alone. I think that that's not a good perspective of Taiwan. Taiwan is where the ruling class of China ruled over China during the imperialist phase. That the leadership of Taiwan worked with imperialists in order to enact the project of humiliation against China, that the the Chinese royalty during that time were working with colonizers in order to enact a policy of colonization against China. And that Mao Zedong was the leader of the military force that fought against those imperialists, which included the Chinese royalty that was working with those imperialists in order to continue this project of poverty within China. And so Mao was able to push the imperialists out, right? Was able to win a series of decisive victories, but he was never able to get into Taiwan, right? He was never able to get into Taiwan, where the Chinese leadership had retreated to. And there was a period of time where Mao was trying to get into Taiwan, because that would be like the end of a struggle for the Chinese people, and that's how they view this. Still, that's how they view this. This relationship between like, you are talking as though Taiwan is its own country. The Chinese do not consider Taiwan to be a separate entity. That the Chinese consider Taiwan to be part of China, and that position was even acknowledged by the Nixon administration in the part of the reason why the war ended between the Americans and the Chinese is that the Americans declared Taiwan to be part of China, and China made the statement, okay, what we'll do is we'll have two systems, one country, right? And that way we don't need to invade Taiwan. Okay? Again, like, China goes through a period of time where they're trying to avoid war, and they're trying to avoid escalation, and they're trying to avoid conflict, right? They're trying to make that puts them at odds with the Maoists that are not trying to avoid war and not trying to avoid conflict. The Maoists are very pro-war and very they believe that objectives can be completed for China and communism through war. Whereas the Dangists that come in are very much like, no, let's negotiate. Let's create trade deals. Let's create political alliances. Let's do things diplomatically, right? And so the relationship between China and Taiwan since the 60s, even acknowledged by the Americans themselves, is that Taiwan is part of China. And that and that Taiwan is a province of China. Which is why what the Biden administration has been doing to China and doing in Taiwan is completely unacceptable, because they've been treating Taiwan as if it's its own independent country. And that is hearkening back to the colonial history and beginning to treat Taiwan as though it can become an American property, right? It's basically America creating the groundwork for taking Taiwan away from China. And this, of course, is going to result, if they continue forward in this way, it will eventually result in China sending a military over to Taiwan. And the hope from the Chinese perspective is that when they send that military over to Taiwan, it'll be military lands. They go to the palace and they say, here we are, the Chinese military in the glorious country of China. And the Taiwanese leadership will say, yes, we welcome you, visitors from the mainland, to the island of Taiwan, a province of the glorious country of China. And that's what the Chinese want, and that's what the National People's Congress wants, is it wants that kind of relationship. It doesn't want to have to bomb it. It doesn't want to have to send in troops. It doesn't want to have a war. It doesn't want that. It wants it to be diplomatic, and it wants it to be in that way. But the Chinese have never been able to get a military force into Taiwan, right? And so there is a segment, the psychopath class of the system, that still makes the argument that Taiwan is an independent nation when it's not. It's a part of China. It's always been a part of China. It just has this political history that creates an opening for opportunists and imperialists and psychopaths to go in and try to create a military base off the coast of China that is unsinkable. Like, I think we should see what Taiwan wants for itself rather than what the U.S. wants or what China wants. Okay, you can look at polls, right? You can look at polls that come out of China or out of Taiwan, and there is a rising sentiment for independence. That's true. But the number one position is that we should keep things as they are. And that's sort of the prevailing idea that exists in Taiwan, is we should keep things as they are, right? That we have our own system, and that we have our own system while being kind of governed by the Chinese mainland. Because it means that Taiwan has a certain degree of independence, right? They can make decisions for themselves, and they can enact policies for themselves, while simultaneously checking into the mainland and being sure that, like, okay, is this cool? Can we do this? Right? It's not true independence, but I would make the argument that there is literally no such thing as a truly independent Taiwan. That's just not a serious position to be taken, right? Like, I like, if we take a very realist position and a very realist standpoint, there is no universe, reality, plane of existence where Taiwan could ever be considered a independent entity off the coast of China. China would never accept it. The United States would never accept it. That Taiwan would be at the very least a vassal of somebody. And so it's going to be a vassal of China, which is essentially the position it's in now. It's in a state of vassalage right now to China. And that's more or less how it should be. And if the Taiwanese were smart, they would basically keep it that way. And they would look at the United States and they would say, hey, this whole flirting thing where you're sending over leadership and you're sending over this kind of stuff, that's dumb. That's leading us down a path of war. Because the Chinese will never allow Taiwan to stand up and say, we are independent. That is not a serious thing. Like, in theory, in the land of theory crafting, where where everything can be decided in a vacuum, sure. Like, I ostensibly support the idea that Taiwan could stand up and declare its own independence. But in the real world where reality exists, that is such a stupid idea that nobody should take it seriously. Of course, Taiwan should be a vassal of China. Of course it should. if it stood up and declared its own independence, China would invade it. And of course it would. Why? Because the idea that we will open up Taiwan to allowing a American military base off the coast of China, what are you fucking talking about? That's the most insane shit I've ever heard in my life. You should never, under any circumstances, support any idea that allows America to put a military base in Taiwan at any point. And Taiwan standing up and declaring its own independence, that's exactly where it's going. That's exactly where it's going. And so, should the Taiwanese declare their own independence and China invade it, I would support it. I would be like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't they do that? Like, obviously. It would be like when the Russians were putting nuclear bombs in Cuba, America lost its mind over it. Why? Well, why do you think? Right? Why do you think? So it's the same sort of idea, and it's the same sort of mindset. And yeah, so I think that's the long and short of it for me. Yeah, Taiwan would be a normal province of China without the USA, right? And if it wasn't for the United States, like, let's say the only thing that exists in all creation is literally China and literally the island of Taiwan. That's the only political force that exists. All other land masses are gone. It's just China and it's just Taiwan. And then if Taiwan stood up and said, we would like to be independent, well, then, yeah, I would ostensibly support that. Right? But that's not what reality looks like. Right? That you have this enormous military force in the United States, which incidentally has covered Southeast Asia in military bases. Right? So it's not in a vacuum. It's not even close to in a vacuum. Right? The United States has put military bases in Indonesia. It's put military bases in the Philippines. It's put military bases in Myanmar and in all over Southeast Asia. And so the idea that you're going to allow the United States access to Taiwan, get the fuck right out of here. Get the fuck right out of here with that thought. Yeah. China should pump billions into Texas and weapons. China should control Texas media. China should promote its candidate in Texas. The Texas people should decide. Yeah, I mean, same kind of idea. A little bit more dramatic, but Jack on Twitch writes, the people who live in the U.S. should deconstitute the U.S. and create a new regime. I think that's where it's heading. Like, I take a look at what's going on in Texas. Texas is a good thing to bring up, given what's going on in Texas. I think that it's likely that that's the path that the United States will take, and that the idea that the United States will stay together as an entity is pretty unlikely, right? Pretty unlikely that the United States stays together. Historically speaking, when empires decline, they break apart, right? They fall apart, and it's going to start the true decline of the American empire. The moment that there's a tipping point, right? And there's usually tipping points for these sorts of things. The tipping point is the existence of Israel for the American empire. Because most of the energy and most of the thoughts and most of the ideology and most of the action of the American empire starts with Israel. Because Israel is a military base that allows them to use Israel as a lily pad into the Middle East. And should Israel cease to exist, or should Israel be taken over by its enemies, that will be the true herald of the decline of the American empire. And America is getting itself into a position where it can no longer afford these military bases, where it can no longer afford to have all of these all of this impact overseas. It's losing control of Latin America in big and major ways. right? It can't just send a military into Brazil or Venezuela. It's attempted to do coups in Latin America recently and have failed, right? And so the American empire is losing control of Latin America. Well, the same thing will happen with Africa. That the European colonizers and the history of European colonization is, well, the African nations are beginning to throw those guys out, and they're beginning to lose control. And it won't be much longer until the Americans won't be able to have military bases in the Middle East, and they won't be able to have military bases in Southeast Asia, right? Because they won't be able to afford them. They won't be able to actually supply those troops, and so they'll have to start pulling people out, right? And the empire will recede, and will come and historically speaking, this is true in Greece. This is true in Rome. This is true in the ancient Chinese empires. The method by which foreign powers were governed is the method by which the power structure will govern domestically, right? That they'll take the way that they were acting in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and they will begin to act that way in America domestically. And so the American empire is not long for this world, in my view. And it's likely that situations like what's happening under Greg Abbott right now in Texas will get worse. Do you think the U.S. should stop patrolling the trade routes? I don't think it's that they should stop. It's that they just won't be able to. Right? Like, once the system of finance capital experiences like another collapse and another like, the United States is really going to have to make some decisions, some very, very serious decisions. And the people who are in power are not serious people. They're clowns. And so you're going to have the people who are in power are going to make a series of very bad decisions very quickly, because you have a society that can only see in the short term. They're not intelligent people. They're all careerists. They're not interested in the success of their own nation. They're interested in their own personal success. Period. Full stop. That the success of somebody else is just a byproduct of their own personal success. And and so it's not that the United States should stop patrolling. It's that they're not going to be able to. Right? They're not going to be able to maintain control of international trade. And they're already losing control of international trade, by the way. Right? It's the reason why the United States, why China is the number one trading partner with most of the rest of the world, is that the United States is losing control of international trade. Perhaps before that happens, the empire will switch gears and own communism for itself? No. It will decline and destroy itself first. Right? Like, the phrase better dead than red plays. America chooses death. It will destroy itself before it makes a pivot into anything even resembling communism. You will see individual states, adopt communist ideas and communist thoughts, and you might even see communist revolution occur within individual states. But you will also see fascist uprisings in individual states. Right? This is the biggest reason why the federals, on the federal level, the United States won't be able to stay together, because you're going to have opposing ideologies and opposing ideas taking place in different states across the Union that are incompatible with one another. And it's going to rip the country apart in a very, very serious way. Like, not just let's talk about it. Like, Kyle Rittenhouse, guns on the ground. Like, it's and it's going to accelerate. It's going to happen very, very, very quickly. And for the most part, the people who are in power are going to be dim-witted careerists who are going to make a series of bad decisions very quickly. And they're going to make decisions for themselves and nobody else. and like you could take a look, like Florida is turning into a fascist state. Texas was always kind of a fascist state in the first place. Now it's declaring its own independence in regards to border issues. This is only going to inflame independence movements. But then you also do have places like Seattle, which has a more social democrat mindset, right? And is much more willing to actually take a look at what do our people need and what we should do something about our people. And of course, the struggle that those places are having is that they're dealing with capitalists who are working against their interests, and they're not willing to go full-blown communist yet because they still want to believe that they can negotiate with psychopaths, and they can't. So you're going to see a lot of different elements and a lot of different things happen. And I think that, the election of Donald Trump is going to really accelerate that. There's going to be a real acceleration because of Donald Trump. Host, I think your expectations for early decline... Oh, no, I'm not saying early. Like, I'm not saying this happens tomorrow. Right? Like, I'm not saying the United States decline. Like, everything I just said, I don't expect that to happen over the next 5 years. Right? I think that that's the trajectory, though. Like, I think it happens within my lifetime, right? So I'll be 80, right? And these things will begin to manifest themselves in serious ways, right? And and it is possible that the United States will pull back on the reins, but it's going to take a lot of what's called political will. It's going to take a lot of political maneuvering, and it's going to take a lot of energy that, frankly, I just don't see. I just don't see that energy, right? Jack continues, the U.S. military-industrial complex and business class have military control of a major chunk of Turtle Island and also much mind share among the middle class who live there. The land can provide much in the way of military provisioning for aggression abroad, for continued aggression. I just don't see it that way. And a big thing, look, the number one thing that the military is facing is the decline in military enlistment. That nothing kills a military faster than a country that refuses to engage in the military. So the biggest crisis that's actually happening today, is climate change, obviously, but the biggest crisis that the political class, that the capitalist class is facing, is the massive population decline that it has inflicted on its own people. That Gen Alpha, what's being called Gen Alpha. So if you're 14 right now, you're in Gen Alpha. As a cohort, that group is half the size of Gen Z, half the size as demographically, right? So if there's 500,000, let's say, or let's make it easier. If there's 1 million Gen Z, there's only 500,000 Gen Alpha, right? So that's a massive decline. That's a massive, massive decline in the in your population statistics. It's the reason why the Western world is going crazy with immigration, because they look at those demographics and they're like, oh shit, we need people in here to shore that up. But nobody's willing to join the military, right? Military enlistment is down massively because of all of this. And it's because the population is looking at the military as unviable. U.S. aggression does not require much labor power. I disagree. Boy, do I disagree with that. It requires an enormous amount of labor power to make the American military work. For sure it does. It's the reason why the Russians won the conflict between Ukraine in the Ukrainian crisis, is because they couldn't get the labor power, right? Well, whereas the Russians could. That the Russians said, we're going to draft 100,000 people. And they pulled up 100,000 reservists and they put them in the field. And if they needed to, they would have done it again. And how many boots came out of Europe and how many boots came out of America? Fucking nothing. Like maybe tens of thousands, maybe. But they're foreign mercenaries, and so they're not going to fight to the death. And so it really just boiled down to how much labor could they put into the conflict, right? And the Russians could put in a lot more, and that's not even including their ability to generate goods to manufacture, right? So you've got an economy that shifts into a war economy on the manufacturing side of it, and then you've got the ability to actually draft citizens and the ability to actually pull people up, and moreover the ability to call a draft and actually have people come, right? So it's like an enormously different situation that is very rooted in the idea of labor power. Like, you need people, and if you don't have people, then you can't run the thing, right? And the American military is in a labor crisis, is in a personnel crisis. You think Russia has already won in Ukraine? Yeah, the territory that they've seized is their territory now. They're not going to push into the rest of Ukraine. And it's likely that Ukraine as an entity begins to collapse and that different things start to happen. Have the NATO standard weapons been removed or destroyed? I mean, they can't field an army, right? And the NATO is no longer funneling more money into it. The United States State's Department has already said that they're not going to put any more money towards Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have the personnel or the labor power. The Russians have claimed the territory that they want to claim. They're not going to push into Ukraine. They're not going to push into Kiev. They're not going to push into the larger territory because they don't want to govern that territory. And right now, it's just how many more Ukrainians do you want to see die? That's all. The U.S.-backed Nazis in the Ukraine can shoot rockets into Russia. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's like the end of all violence and conflict forever, but like the Russians have won, for sure. Like they own a huge section of eastern Ukraine, or what was once eastern Ukraine, and Ukraine is not going to get that back, right? They own Crimea. Like, I'm not saying that independent individual acts of violence and terrorism will not continue. I'm saying that from a military perspective, in terms of a military operation, Ukraine has no capacity to actually take territory, right? Yeah, Mr. Putin says denazification is important to him and has not been completed. Sure. But like, that's an extremely long-term goal, right? Like, and eventually there just comes a point where like if your standard for what is the end of a war is there's no such thing as a Nazi anymore, okay, then everyone's always at war 100% of the time, and there's no such thing as the end of a war. No, what'll eventually happen is that that Russia and Ukraine will sit down and they'll negotiate peace, right? And it's likely that eventually there'll be some election or some changing of the guard internally, and Zelensky will be deposed, and the new person that comes in will either be so far right that he'll be a lunatic, which will lead to more military action, or it'll be somebody who will be like, okay, Putin, and they'll come to terms, right? Because Ukraine is not going to get that territory back. There's no more serious military action that can happen. They don't have the personnel, the men, the equipment, the ammo, or the fuel. They don't have the capacity to wage a large-scale frontal war against Russia. Should Russia get into a position where it's feeling a pinch and it needs to, it'll call up more reservists. Ukraine can't do that. NATO's not supplying. The United States is not supplying, right? And so if it sort of depends on what you consider to be the end. And if you consider the end of the war that there's no such thing as a Nazi anymore, well, I don't really take that seriously. That it is about territory and resources. It is about what territory is owned. It is about who has control over what. And the real truth is that if Ukraine was smart, which it's not, but if it was, it would sit down, it would negotiate terms. It would have done that a year ago. But again, it's not. It's controlled by far-right Nazis and far-right fascists. And because where Ukraine is going now, like where it's headed now, is that Russia will own the territory it has. It'll create a barrier, right? And it won't actually fight. It won't push in to Kiev, but Kiev won't be able to control its own territory any longer. And you've already got Hungary and Slovakia and Poland talking about slicing off pieces of Ukraine. And it's possible that we'll just see Ukraine collapse internally, and that other countries will basically say, to be merciful to the people who live in these Ukraine. And it's completely possible that you'll see pockets of Ukraine that are close to the Polish border, close to the Hungarian border, actually say, please come in. Please come in. We need administration. We need control. We need something in here. We've lost everything. We don't have the lights on anymore, right? We don't have food distribution anymore. We don't have anything anymore. We need help. And they'll say, okay, well, we're getting a call for help. We're going in, right? Yeah, Zionism is behaviorally indistinguishable from Nazism. That I definitely agree. Juan, you've been saying a lot in my chat here. China is such a little freaky empire. I disagree. I think that they are a 4,000-year-old civilization that are being run currently on Marxist principles, that they are governing themselves in a way that they feel is practical and prudent, and that what they have built is successful trade routes and successful trade relations with not only their neighbors, but also the rest of the world. That China is a fascinating place that we should definitely learn a lot more about and a lot more from. I really like China as a country, and if I had a neighbor and that neighbor acted the way that China acted, I would think that that's a good neighbor. What do you mean climate crisis? What do you mean climate crisis? There's a massive, enormous climate crisis happening right now. Come on, Juan. Let's stop this. Let's stop this. Right? The climate crisis has been happening for decades. We are now living in it. Last year was the hottest year on record, smashing all previous records. And smashing the previous record set by the year before it, which smashed the previous record of the year before it. We are obviously in a climate crisis. To deny the climate crisis at this point is to engage in, like flat earther level intellectualism. The climate crisis is right in front of us. Any institution that has studied it has showed that there is a massive heating of the earth, and that we are in an enormous, massive, large-scale crisis. Young Russians are escaping to North Korea to run of the war. I mean, you'll always find some groups of people defecting one way or the other. That's why I don't find the defection argument to be very interesting, because people, if you universalize the experience of a single person, you can pretend anything is happening, right? But the truth is that most people joined the war effort, and that the war effort in Russia is considered necessary and actually quite popular. Mikhail writes, I feel like Trump is being positioned to say that he wants peace, but if the Biden administration engineers World War III, he will get to say he would have stopped it, but nothing can be done. Now it's too late. Yeah, I mean, that's basically what they did with the climate crisis, right? Now it's too late. So no sense. All right, let's watch that again. Oops, what did I do? Like, do you think Nazism is real? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely I do. Like, absolutely I do, dude. Like, you can take a look at what happened in Ukraine to see, like, the Azov Battalion, or what's called the Azov Brigade. They keep rebranding so that people can't find out about them. They were an open neo-Nazi organization within the Ukrainian military. Absolutely, like, Nazism is alive and well in our country and our community. The Nazis were rehabilitated through NATO. Lots of former Nazis were in NATO. One of them was at one point the chair of NATO. Adolf Hausinger. And NATO exists, like when you think about what NATO is, like NATO contains within it a formerly Nazi state that had within it lots of Nazis. So the Nazis were rehabilitated through NATO. And and you take a look at the support we gave the Ukrainian Nazis and the Nazi organizations that exist across Ukraine. Like, there's plenty of reporting on Canada about the support we gave to Nazis. And then on top of that, we literally honored a Nazi in our parliament in front of Zelensky. Like, not Nazism is very mainstream and it's very real today, for sure. That is wrong because Europe and America continues to fuel Ukraine every month. They're holding their grips. They're being fed against the Rurus. No, the American State Department has stopped giving, like, they've stopped giving money to Ukraine, right? And they've said that they're going to stop giving money to Ukraine. And part of a big reason why they've stopped giving money to Ukraine is because of the conflict that's happening in Israel. That now they've had to start funneling resources into Israel. And Israel is a much, 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 much more important project than the conflict on the Ukrainian-Russian border. And so they've stopped supporting that financially. They've stopped sending weapons. Like, sure, maybe you'll find like one deal somewhere, one place at one time where Lockheed Martin gives like a package or something, but it's not hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And so yeah, they've been losing ground to Russia pretty consistently since the start of the year. Yeah, Africa could fall over the next month. They are in a cauldron. Like, and Russia's perspective in regards to that conflict is they don't want to push into Ukraine, right? They are fighting over passage of a 90 billion package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, though. Yeah. Like, I just don't think that even if they sent Ukraine $50 billion right now, I don't think it's going to have the impact that you think it's going to have, right? And the reason why it's not going to have the impact that it's not going to have is that Ukraine doesn't have the personnel. Like, wars are won with boots on the ground. That's the hard truth about the whole thing, is that Ukraine doesn't have people. It doesn't have personnel. It doesn't have men, right? It just doesn't have men to win this thing. And Russia is not in a hurry. It's not rushing. The clock is not against Russia. The clock is against Ukraine, right? The clock is ticking for Ukraine and not Russia. And so that ticking clock, right, tick, 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 is working against Ukraine. And I feel like even if you gave them, like, send in some tanks, do all that kind of stuff, you don't have anybody to run them. You don't have anybody to actually use them, right? Because you don't have any people. And Europe and NATO and America and all these, like, we're not sending men. We're definitely not. So I think the boots on the ground thing is gradually changing. Our enemies can launch semi-autonomous armed aircraft from locations they control and bomb any location. Yeah, but that doesn't move, like, that doesn't move the needle. Like, I mean, you want to be able to do that in order to soften up your target, but the thing that moves the line are people. Right? The thing that actually moves the line, and the thing that actually lets you say we control this territory, and the thing that actually lets you draw the line and say this is where the line is now, right, are troops. And it's always going to be that way. Like, you can do a lot of work from the sky, and you can do a lot of work in terms of softening up targets. You can do a lot of that stuff in terms of making it easier for troops to push forward, right? Which is what you're actually doing, right? So like if they have 1,000 men and you have 1,000 men, and then you send in a bunch of missiles and bomb them so that they have 500 men and you have 1,000 men, well, you've softened it up so that you send the troops in. But it always comes down to, and it will never change, send troops in. And if you don't send troops in, doesn't matter. It comes down to men. It comes down to manpower, and that will always be that way. Well, I feel like we've reached the end of this one, guys. A good, a good, a good, a good first cast on my way back. I need to eat. I need to get some food. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Revolt. Rebel. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.